chronology before I move to another topic. That's in January of 2011. What we know is that in May of 2011, not long after that, you might have read about Mr. Gigaba, then Minister Gigaba, seeking to replace Mr. Mkunazi, the chairperson, with Mr. Sharma as the chairperson. Have you read about that?
No. No, I haven't seen that.
We'll deal with that with Mr. Gigaba, and Cabinet refused that attempt to make Mr. Sharma the chairperson.
Of Transnet?
Yes.
I was not aware of that.
But what you would be aware of, though, is that a year or so later, in August of 2012, Mr. Sharma was appointed, wasn't he, as the chairperson of the BADC?
Yes.
Let us then deal with your appointment as the CEO of Eskom also having been predicted. Now, I'm aware that you've been asked questions about this. But of course, Mr. Bester was a Transnet stream witness.
Yes.
And you remember his evidence was that he went to a meeting with Mr. Essa at JB's Corner in Melrose Arch sometime between, I think it was May and November of 2014. And
Yes.
it was at that meeting that Mr. Essa told Mr. Bester, and I quote, they, he assumed that was the Guptas, had already decided that the new boss of Eskom will be Mr. Molefe, and that an announcement will be made in the newspapers soon. You've again, as I understand it, testified that you don't know where or know anything about that. Is that correct?
I don't know anything about that, and in addition to that, I don't know Mr. Essa. I've never met Mr. Essa.
But you didn't need to meet Mr. Essa.
I didn't even know who he was.
Yes. Mr. Essa was a Gupta lieutenant, as he's been described. He would go out and make contact with people like Mr. Bester. The Guptas didn't need to make contact with you through Mr. Essa, Mr. Molefe. Correct?
Come again?
The Guptas did not need to make contact with you through Mr.
No.
Essa. You were a long-standing associate of theirs, correct?
I did not meet Mr. Essa.
Yeah.
So I did not know Mr. Essa. That's all I'm saying.
You could perhaps just deal with my proposition. The Guptas didn't need to send...
I don't know that what the Guptas needed to do or did not need to do.
Let's explore the role of Mr. Essa. Two examples come to mind, and you'll see as I go through your evidence, it's really punctuated with Mr. Essa. Let me give you two examples of where Mr. Essa pops up. One here in this meeting with Mr. Bester. Right? And where he also pops up is Mr. Gama gives evidence that he sees Mr. Essa in Mr. Singh's office. This is in the latter part of 2015.
Where? Transnet?
Yes, at Transnet. And he goes in, and Essa says to him, I'd like to meet with you. And he says to him, well, you can get my details from Mr. Singh. And in time, Mr. Essa contacts Mr. Gama and sets up a meeting. Mr. Gama says, unknown to him, that meeting is set up at what turns out to be the Gupta compound. So that's what Mr. Essa was doing. But the Guptas didn't need to send Mr. Essa to meet with you. You knew them. You were dealing with the generals, effectively. You didn't need to deal with the lieutenant, correct?
I have testified that I knew them.
Yeah. Sorry, can you just deal with my proposition? It's not surprising that Mr. Essa wasn't deployed to meet with you, because you were dealing with the Guptas directly.
No, I can't comment on what Mr. Essa was deployed to do or not deployed to do. But I did not know Mr. Essa.
Yes.
I did know the Guptas.
Well, Mr. Molefe, when counsel puts to you the proposition that he puts to you, he is giving you an opportunity to dispute his proposition, to say that it's incorrect, or to say it is correct, or if you think it's based on a false or premise, to say that because later on that proposition may be relied upon in the assessment of all the evidence.
Yes,
So I'm just making sure that when you decide not to say anything, you know what the implications are. That's all I'm doing.
yes, but all I'm saying, Chair, is that he says that the Guptas never sent Esa to meet with me. There's no way that I can know that.
No, he is not saying that. He is saying to you, if they wanted to talk to you, that is the Guptas,
Yes,
there would have been no need for them to send Mr. Esa or anybody,
yes.
because they were having direct interactions with you. That's
Yes.
what he's saying. You agree with that?
Yes, yes. They,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
if there was a need to talk to me, they could have spoken to me because I knew them.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Yeah. Mr. Maibek?
Thank you. So,
If I misrepresented what you said.
no, not at all. And I think you correctly summarize it. Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Molefe, so is this just another coincidence then? I mean, there's a prediction that you're going to become the GC of Transnet. That turns out correct. Here you told, or there's a piece of evidence that Mr. Esa tells Mr. Bester that you're going to become the next CEO of Eskom, and that happens. Do you just chalk that down to a coincidence?
Perhaps,
A coincidence.
yes, perhaps a coincidence.
So when you first,
I really can't comment on it. I don't know if it was a coincidence. I don't know what it was.
when you
But
say,
it is something that I'm not aware, I can't comment on.
when you say you can't comment, do you mean that you really can't or you don't want to?
I can't.
Well, I want to engage you about this. So presumably when did you first hear this quite riveting evidence, shocking evidence by Mr. Bester? When did you first hear of it?
By Mr. Bester.
Yes, when he was here before the commission and he gave this evidence that Mr. Esa told him between May and November 2014 that you would become the next CEO of Transnet. When did you first hear of that evidence?
Of ESCOM.
I beg your pardon, of Eskom.
Of Eskom.
Yes.
I don't know, perhaps when Mr. Bester came here.
Yeah.
When Mr. Bester came here, yes, or when I got the documents, I'm not sure, the Eskom documents.
But it must have surprised you.
No, I didn't.
No.
I wasn't surprised,
Oh,
nor was I moved at all.
I
It
see.
was just something that he said there that I didn't think anything about. I just thought, these people talk about you all the time. I wasn't
Phew.
shocked or surprised.
you didn't?
I have people talking about me all the time. I have journalists and newspapers saying things that are pitifully wrong, that I don't take to head anymore.
But this-
So when I do hear rumors about myself, they just don't enter my system.
But Mr. Molefe, we're going to spend a long time together, it seems.
I'm sorry to
But,
disappoint.
and it's
I'm
not a- it's not
I'm
a
sorry
bad
to
thing.
disappoint you then.
No, you don't. In fact, you actually assist
your,
me.
your
but-
expectation for me to be surprised does not materialize.
But perhaps if you could just bear with me and allow me to ask my question. Are you seriously saying that when you heard that Mr. Esa had said this, that didn't surprise you or concern you at all? That's really my question. Yes or no?
But I don't know who Mr. Esa is.
Well, you do know of Mr. Esa's links with the Guptas.
Yes, now I do.
And you knew it at the time that Mr. Bester gave evidence. That's why I'm trying to press you. It must have been of concern to you.
Would you rather it was of concern to me?
I just want you to answer the question
I've
honestly.
answered the question. I said it wasn't.
So,
Well, Mr. Molefe, at the time that Mr. Bester gave evidence, even if in 2011 or 2015 you didn't know of his links with the Guptas. Certainly, at the time that Mr. Bester gave his evidence before the commission, you knew or had heard, you were aware of all the allegations of corruption associated with the Guptas. And you would have heard that he was said to have been an associate of the Guptas, and you would have been aware that the allegations, and there's been evidence that he had been mentioned in a number of instances associated with allegations of state capture and corruption, isn't it?
Yes, Chair, but
Yes.
Chairperson.
Okay, now before you proceed, you would have been aware. Being aware of that, I would have expected that if when Mr. Bester gave evidence, he said that Mr. Essa had told him in 2014 that you would be the next boss of ESCOM. And indeed, the following year, you did become the next boss of ESCOM. I would have expected you to be quite concerned. How could Mr. Essa, who is associated with all kinds of allegations of corruption and state capture, have said he and whoever else, they had decided that I would be the next boss of ESCOM, and indeed I became the next boss of ESCOM. I would have expected you to be concerned, to say, were there people who were using my name here to put me in situations that were compromising? I would have expected you to be concerned about that. What do you say about it? Is my expectation, would my expectations have been unjustified?
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes. You think I should have expected that you would have no problem with that?
Chairperson, can I explain this?
Yeah.
Firstly, Mr. Bester heard from somebody.
Sorry, just repeat that sentence.
Mr. Bester heard from somebody, says he was told by somebody that I would become CEO of
No. He said he heard from Mr.
That
Essa
somebody
himself.
is Mr. Salim.
Yes, he was told by Mr. Salim. That was his evidence.
He was told by somebody there where they were in a restaurant in one evening. His dinner partner, Mr. Essa, it happened to Mr. Essa, told him that I would become CEO of ESCOM, number one. So he had it from somebody. He does not have personal knowledge of it, number one.
Mr. Essa may have had personal knowledge of it.
No, but we don't know that. Mr. Essa.
Well, he told him, and it did happen.
No, Chairperson, please allow me to finish.
I will allow you, but I just want you to understand.
Where you coming from?
Yes, because I'm interested in your explanation.
Yes, but I'm trying to tell you where I'm coming from.
Yes, okay, all right.
Secondly, the person that Mr. Bester is talking about.
Maybe complete your firstly, so I make sure I've heard all of it.
So the first one is, it was hearsay. Mr. Bester had it from somebody that he was having dinner with. Mm-hmm. It was hearsay. He had it, it was gossip, it was hearsay. He had it there while they were having dinner in my absence. Secondly, the person that he's talking about, I have never met. I've never met him, I actually don't know him. Why would something that was said by somebody that I don't know worry me? Why would it worry me? And the fact that it eventually happened, I know how it happened. I know that I was approached by the minister, not Mr. Essa. I don't know if the minister has a link with Mr. Essa, but I know how it actually eventually happened. And in my knowledge of how it happened, there's no discussion with Bester and Essa. They don't feature anywhere. That is something that is like a random event that happened there, which this commission is now trying to elevate to an event of significance. But in my head, it was between Mr. Bester. I actually don't even, I'm not even I'm not even an acquaintance of Mr. Bester. I just know him from his, that he was a manager there at ESCOM. So Mr. Bester, who is not even acquainted with me, has a discussion with somebody that I don't know. And that is supposed to worry me. No, it doesn't. It is something that happened there that I don't know anything about. I know how I got to be appointed to ESCOM. I can account about how I got to be appointed to ESCOM, and it has got nothing to do with people that I don't know. That is why it doesn't worry me.
Well, you don't know if it has anything to do with people that you don't know. All you know is that the minister approached you.
Yes.
But you don't know whether the minister might have had some discussion with either Mr. Essa or the Guptas. That at least you would say to me, you don't know that. All you know is the minister approached you.
Chairperson, I've just went to lunch at the canteen. There's a guy who dished up a salad for me. I don't know that guy. He might actually, as I was walking in, have said to the guy next to him, "This is Brian Molefe." Must that worry me, Chairperson? Or must I get worried about who that person knows that I might know? Or, I mean, I can't live my life like that, seeing ghosts or seeing shadows everywhere. When Mr. Bester walks in, I mean, this is the man who had a dinner with somebody that I don't know, and they talked about me, and they said I will be appointed at ESCOM, and I'm supposed to shiver and worry about that and stress about it. I had Chairperson, no. There are things to worry about.
Yes, and this would not be one of them.
This was not one of them.
Well, I'm going to make say one or two things, and then Mr. Molefe would continue. On my logic, if it is true that you had never met Mr. Essa and you didn't know him,
Yes.
I would expect that should worry you more than it should have if you knew him. The fact that, particularly when it did happen, or rather when you bear in mind that you are told that he said in 2014 that they had decided that you would be the next boss of ESCOM, and then you know, as Mr. Bester was giving evidence, that indeed the following year it did happen. My logic says, if it was somebody that you knew, maybe you might not be concerned because you know the person. But if it's somebody that you didn't know, my logic says it should worry you more to say, how can somebody that I didn't even know, that I'd never met, know so much about me, even what position I was going to hold the following year? That would be my expectation. But I think you have made your point.
Maybe, Chairperson, unlike you and Mr. Molefe, I'm not a good conspiracy theorist.
Well, you are getting a chance. You are saying it's conspiracy theories. You are getting a chance to influence my thinking. You see, I'm saying to myself, Mr. Essa, I'm saying to myself, a newspaper belonging to the Guptas said on the 7th of December 2010 that they had it on good authority that you would be appointed as Group CEO of Transnet. That was December 7. January 7, February 7, mid-February 10, 11, 12, or thereabout, I'm not sure, you get appointed as Group CEO of ESCOM, of Transnet. That worries me. How did they know? How did they get it so right? You say it doesn't worry you, it didn't worry you at the time. Then I now hear evidence that somebody who was who is accepted in terms of the evidence that has been led to have been a Gupta associate, tells somebody in 2014 in a meeting that we are very powerful. We have decided that Mr. Brian Molefe is going to be the next boss of ESCOM. And it happens the following year. I don't see how I shouldn't be wanting to find out how was that possible, particularly when you tell me you didn't know Mr. Essa. So, but the opportunities for you to put your perspective, put your side of the story, so that all of this can be taken into account in the assessment of the evidence.
So, Chairperson, if it was you, you would have been worried.
I would have been worried.
And then what?
Investigate. Who is this person? Where does he get this from? Mr. Maibek?
I'm afraid if you were in my position, you would have been investigating every day. You would have spent your life just pursuing rabbit holes that are going nowhere.
We might be different, Mr. Molefe.
Yes.
But I'm giving you the benefit of how I would have dealt with the matter, and you are free, and you might influence me to change my mind about that. You might say, look, I'm different. This is how I dealt with it, and I dealt with it in this way because of ABCD, which you have said. Okay,
Yes.
Mr. Maibek?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Molefe, I assume what must have concerned you, though, is when you came to learn of the context in which your name was used by Mr. Essa.
What is your assumption?
Well, what Mr. Bester said is not an assumption.
No,
Mr.
you started your sentence by saying you assume.
Mr. Bester said that Mr. Essa referred to you. They knew all about you, and they knew you were going to become the next CEO of ESCOM, but it was in the context of him attempting to put pressure on Mr. Bester to appoint Essa's business as a supplier development partner. Now, when you heard that, that must have concerned you.
Chairperson, Mr. Bester never approached me with this hearsay
I'm
evidence.
asking you, when you heard this in the commission, it must have
In
concerned
the commission, now recently.
Yes.
There was no reason to be concerned. It was things that had happened in the past. Perhaps maybe if Mr. Bester had come to me and said to me, I heard from Mr. Essa that you're going to be the next CEO, maybe I would have been concerned.
So, Mr.
But it comes out in the context of the commission. It is hearsay, and I expect that the commission will test the veracity, but that is not my job. Where I am now, what Mr. Bester was saying he had a few years ago is not something that concerned me.
Mr. Molefe, Mr. Essa was engaging in corrupt activity using your name. Can you be quoted as saying, when you heard that, it just didn't concern you? And then let's move to the next topic. It didn't concern you, correct?
Well, if you say Mr. Essa was engaged in corrupt activity using my name, is that what you found?
Of course it would concern you, correct?
No.
Oh, well, I'm not going to carry on.
I'm
with this.
sorry, Mr. Molefe. I want to make sure I heard clearly. Are you saying if somebody testified under oath,
Yes.
and the gist of part of his evidence was that somebody was using your name to advance corruption, his corrupt activities, that would not concern you?
But I don't know that person.
But if it is so, does it, for you, does it matter that you know or you don't know the person?
You know, it would concern me if I was also involved in some kind of activity that is corrupt and so on and so forth. Maybe I would have been concerned. But when I knew that this person was just, people do this all the time. Chairperson, I can give you an example. People will say to somebody, and it has happened to me, I know Mr. Molefe, and I can arrange a meeting with him for you, but you must pay me 20,000. And the person pays 20,000. And the person comes to me and says that, look, you have to meet so-and-so, they've got a good project and what have you and so on. And then I agree to meet them. But I don't know that this person is actually being paid to organize the meeting. And I discover late that that guy actually paid this one to organize a meeting with me. Well, firstly, I wasn't part of the deal. That's why it doesn't worry me. I wasn't part of the deal. I just think, it's unfortunate, and people do these unfortunate things, and they use my name to make money for themselves and so on. But it is not something that my life has to stop about.
Well, I must confess, I'm very concerned about that evidence, Mr. Molefe. If I heard that somebody went to an attorney, for example, or advocate,
Yes.
or a court official,
Yes.
and said, and used my name
Yes.
in order to achieve wrongdoing,
Yes.
I would be very concerned, because I would never want anybody to use my name to advance criminality. And I would have expected that that would be your attitude too.
Well, Chairperson, what if you don't know that it is alleged was advancing criminality? You don't know them, you've never met them, and there are allegations that they are advancing criminality. And they are just allegations, and my attitude, Chair, would be that you'll spend your life investigating. People do all sorts of things. You'll spend your life running down rabbit holes, which is what I try to avoid with my life, just chasing and chasing and chasing rabbit holes that have no meaning. There's a great example, Chairperson, of a farmer who was having a problem with a rabbit that was damaging his vegetable garden, vegetable patch. And he saw the rabbit go into the barn, and he shot at the rabbit. But the barn caught fire, and people came to put out the fire. And the big question remained, but what happened to the rabbit?
Well, I guess I understand your evidence correctly to say, as long as you don't know the person who uses your name to achieve wrongdoing, corruption, criminality, you would not be concerned.
As long as I don't know the person who it is alleged is using my name. It's alleged. Is using my name. Then, Chairperson, I had all sorts of other things to do.
You would not even want to go to the police and say, I don't have all the facts, but I hear somebody is going around, for example, the township, collecting money using my name for criminal activities. You would not even go to the police.
Well, I mean,
because you don't know them.
To go to the police, you would have to have evidence of wrongdoing.
Yes,
and
but you wouldn't.
Once you have the evidence of wrongdoing, that it is indeed so, and that they are indeed corrupt, and that there is evidence that crimes were committed, then you're obliged to report to the police. But as long as you meet somebody who says that he so-and-so steals cars, and he was talking about you, And you don't even have evidence that that person stole a car. I mean, what are you going to say when you get to the police station?
So,
Usbane Bane, Wale Ginza is talking about me. And you don't even know that person.
Mr. Mybeck, continue.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Molefe, perhaps we live in different worlds. But
Yes, you and I do, Mr. Mybeck.
I just want you to know that may very well be that the submissions that I make to the chairperson at the end of the the Transnet stream evidence will be that many of your answers are simply contrary to natural human behavior. And perhaps the submission would be, and I'm giving you an opportunity to answer it, is you doing this, you're presenting these unnatural answers because what you're really trying to do is at all costs to distance yourself from the corruption. That's why you're doing this. You want to comment on that?
I disagree with you.
All right. So let's then deal with your ties with the Guptas. Just before I move on, do I understand that you seemed at least a bit surprised when I told you that Mr. Essa was seen by Mr. Gama at the Transnet offices holding meetings?
Oh, yes, I was surprised.
Well, then you must have been shocked to the core when you heard Mr. Bester's evidence that said before the meeting that Bester had with Essa, where he made the comment, he had a prior meeting with Essa and Singh.
And who?
Mr. Singh.
Who had a meeting with Singh?
The same place they met with you in Melrose Arch, Mr. Molefe.
The person that met with me.
That Mr. Essa met with Mr. Bester when they discussed you. It was in Melrose Arch. They'd had an earlier meeting in Melrose Arch, Bester and Essa. Present at that meeting was Mr. Singh.
Yes.
That must have shocked you when you heard that.
At which meeting?
A meeting preceding the meeting that Mr. Bester gave evidence about, where the comment was made about you becoming the next CEO of Eskom.
I
Did it surprise
would
you or
have
not?
been surprised that Mr. Singh had met Mr. Essa.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with me.
I'm not asking you that, and that isn't an answer. You must have been, if you were surprised when I told you that Gama says that he saw Essa at the Transnet officers meeting with Mr. Singh, if you were surprised by that, how can you not have been surprised by Bester's evidence that said that he met with Essa and Singh? You must have been surprised.
You see, Mr. Mybeck, I think you know Mr. Essa to be corrupt. And that Mr. Bester's gospel truth about the things that Essa said and about the people that he talked about and the meetings that he had, now with hindsight, surprise you. Now with hindsight, shock you and you find revolting. Because we are here today and you now know what you know. But I didn't know Mr. Essa. I didn't know about the corrupt activities. And when people say that, when Mr. Jonas said that, one of the Gupta brothers said we work with Brian Molefe. He doesn't even remember who it was that said so. I know it not to be true, that I worked with them in the manner that he was suggesting. And I don't understand why it should worry me. In Setswana, they say, Lele molato le ikatlola. Lele molato le ikatlola. The guilty conscience convicts itself. I don't know ikatlola in English. So the guilty conscience is the one that. So if you don't have a guilty conscience,
Betrays you.
yes.
A guilty conscience betrays you.
Yeah,
Is
but
that what it
Likatlola
means?
is to give judgment.
Yeah.
Likatlola is to judge yourself.
Yeah, that is I think it means it must mean that when you hear something being said
Yes.
or maybe when you are accused of something
That
you know is true.
yes, yes,
Your guilty conscience tells you, but you know that's true.
yeah, yeah.
So
So-
you might pretend that it's not true, but inside your conscience,
You know.
you know.
And your guilty conscience may force you to act in a particular way.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because you know that
Yeah,
there is substance.
yes.
So, because I did not have that conscience that said that when Mr. Essa's name is mentioned, I must jump and investigate. I didn't do it. I didn't see a need to do it because my conscience didn't demand of me to do anything.
Now, Mr. Molefe, I'm not sure that I understand all of that. But let me just go back.
It means lele molato le
Yes.
ikatlhole.
But you did have a guilty conscience
No.
because you did know what was going on. Are you suggesting that you didn't know at all what Mr. Essa and the Guptas were up to? That they were, on the evidence that has been presented to the Commission, they were engaging in money laundering using the business that you were in charge of? Are you suggesting you didn't know that?
Mr. Molefe,
Yeah.
are you saying that I knew?
I'm asking you, did you
No,
not know?
I'm telling you I didn't.
You didn't know at all.
No.
And to make it worse, the people that were actually the perpetrators, they were friends of yours. The Guptas. We're going to come to that now. So, Mr. Molefe, just so that you understand the context in which my questioning of you takes place.
Mr. Molefe,
Many-
I think that you would like to see a particular outcome, and I'm sorry if I
No,
disappoint you.
so if you just let me finish, because I was, in fairness, going to tell you what I'm going to examine you about.
Yes.
Many chief executive officers have been in your position before, where it's found out that there is corruption and criminal activity on the go under their watch.
Yes.
And then they need to explain themselves. Did they know? Were they asleep at the wheel? Were the crooks too cunning, or were they complicit? And that's really ultimately what the Commission in relation to you will have to decide. Once you accept there was corruption and money laundering, the question then is, you say you didn't know. Well, why do you say that? Why didn't you know? Were you diligent enough? Were you asleep at the wheel? Were these crooks too cunning for you? Or were you actually complicit? And those are what my questions are directed at. So it's not that I want any particular outcome. I want to be able, the Commission wants to be able to answer that question. So that's why I'm probing you. So let me just start out by asking you this.
So you will try to determine whether I knew.
Well, that is what I'm asking you. Are you suggesting that you didn't know?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then the question, of course, arises that why didn't you know? And how is it that you couldn't have known? Now, in fairness to you, those are always hard questions for CEOs in your position to answer. But in fairness to you, I need to point out that what makes your position so much more difficult is that you were friends with the perpetrators. You were frequenting their house. You had a seat at the table. Yet you say you didn't know. How is that possible? Were you being played by these people? Do you feel betrayed by these people? Those are questions that we need to ask and need to be answered by you over the course of the next day. And I put that to you in fairness. Now let's start this line of questioning by me
Well,
asking...
maybe, Mr. Molefe, please don't forget the question you wanted to put just now. Before we move too far, I want to go back a little bit to what you said about what your conscience or anybody's conscience might do when a certain accusation is made. I want to say, what do you say about this proposition that when an accusation is being made against you, and now I'm not talking about you, Mr. Brian Molefe, anybody, if you know it to be true, you may well do nothing about it because you know it is true. Do you accept that that's one of the reactions that can happen? I'm talking now in general, it's a general proposition.
Yes. If I know it to be true,
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
then my reaction might be different.
yes.
If I cannot ascertain whether it is true or not, I don't know if I will invest my time to pursuing it, if maybe it is 50-50. Or maybe if it is unlikely, or if it was said, like I say, by people that I don't know at the dinner table. So if I know it to be definitely true, then maybe my reaction might be different. But if it is something that is just a spurious allegation, then I would not pursue it. I mean, there have been suggestions that I was going to be the next CEO of SAA. I've never gone and investigated who said it, why they said it, and it's like I say, it's a rabbit hole that you end up pursuing to no end, wasting time and resources.
Well, what do you say to a proposition that the reason why you may not have been, is it surprised when the New Age predicted that you were going to, maybe predicted is not the right word, they said they had it on good authority that you would be the next group CEO of Transnet. And when you did become group CEO of Transnet in a few months after the article and a few months after the journalist had contacted you, what do you say to the proposition that the reason why you didn't want to find out how come the New Age got this so correctly?
Yes.
Was because you knew how they knew, because you also knew that you were going to be the next group CEO. So there was nothing to investigate because you knew where they got the information from. What would you say to that?
Yeah, Chairperson, if that question is very important to you and it needs to be investigated, right? And the question is, when they say that they had it from good authority, who was the good authority? I think that is what should interest you. I'm telling you that I did not know anything about it. I was definitely not the good authority that they were talking about. The source of that story was, as they say, good authority. So who was it? Perhaps the commission should have investigated. Perhaps we should have asked the journalist, call the journalist here and say, when you said you had it from good authority, who was the good authority? Did Brian Molefe know about it? What did he say when you confronted him with the question? Because what I said when I was confronted with the question was actually fortunately published. I don't know about it. Nobody talked to me about it. I don't know anything about it.
Thank you. Mr. Maybach?
Yes, so let's go back. Let's start then with your ties.
Because, Chairperson, I think that now it appears to me that just because the commission did not investigate who the good authority is, it looks like you want to heap it on me and say that, Molefe, you knew about this and you were part of it and so on and so forth. When in fact, the correct thing to have done was to ask this journalist, where did you get it from? And how come that you were so accurate? I can't answer those questions.
No, that's fine, Mr. Molefe. And it may well be that asking the journalist might be one option, but I know that journalists normally don't want to reveal their sources. But at least now that you are here, it's legitimate to ask you whether you know, particularly because it's your evidence that you went to the Gupta residence several times.
Yes.
You had a relationship with them.
Yes.
And it was a Gupta-owned newspaper. So you might have said, no, I know how it came about.
but
I was approached,
Chairperson,
blah, 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 or I know nothing about it.
I'm
Nobody
telling
ever
you
talked
that
to me.
I'm telling you that I didn't know.
No, I understand
and
that.
for that I'm being ridiculed.
No, you are not being ridiculed. Your evidence is being tested. That's part of investigating.
Okay.
And what is being done is to put to you other possibilities, to give you a chance to say, no, but that's wrong because of A, B, C, D.
So, Chairperson, you're saying that this line of questioning is part of the investigation of who the source was?
No, well, I'm not talking about the source. Part of what one is trying to do, what the commission is trying to do, is what happened, who were the participants, who knew what, and within the context of the questions Mr. Mybeck just explained to you, there is the question whether you knew about these things or whether you didn't know. You see, and you will give your evidence, say, this I knew, this I didn't know, or I didn't know anything. But it's fair that you should be given a chance to say, I didn't know that, I knew that, and
Yes.
this is the position.
And Chairperson, I can assure you that I have promised that I will cooperate with this commission. I will tell you what I knew.
Yeah, no, that's
And then,
fine.
where I did not know anything,
Yeah,
I will tell you that I did not know.
yeah.
But let me say I will go even further, Chair. I will actually desist from speculating as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine, that's
Because
fine.
I don't think that is fair.
But you must also understand that the evidence leader and I don't necessarily have to just accept what a witness says. Some things you hear and you don't have further questions. Maybe some time later you say, no, but I should have asked that question. Sometimes as you hear what the witness says, a question arises and you put
Yes,
that to the...
yes. Yeah.
Okay, but
Except-
feel free to say what you know. When you don't know, you say you don't know. It just doesn't mean that Mr. Mybeck, if you say you don't know, will necessarily just accept that like that.
Yes.
Sometimes he might have no issues with you saying you don't know. Sometimes he might have issues. Same thing with me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Mybeck?
Thank you. So you previously testified in the Eskom stream that you knew the three Gupta brothers quite well. You said, especially AJ. You said you had a lot of interaction with him. You said that you've been to the Saxonwold compound on numerous occasions. You said you've lost count how many times. And when you were there, you attended family functions and private meetings. Do you
Yes.
remember that evidence?
Yes.
And you said that whilst it's fashionable for people to say that they don't know the Guptas, you were not one of those people.
Yes.
So let's just start out by dealing with how often you went to Saxonwold. You say that you've lost count how many times. How many times did you go there?
I don't know. Numerous times.
Yes. Oh, well, on a, let's say, in an average month, how many times would you go there?
I can't remember, Chairperson.
Well, come, Mr.
This was
Molefe.
7, 8, 9 years ago.
Yes, but you know.
A month? Are you saying 7, 8 a month?
No, 7,
see.
8, 9 years ago.
Okay.
That it happened, yeah. It depends. I mean, as I said, there was a live issue that we had reason to discuss, which was the formation of the bank or the purchase of a bank. And that we would discuss, and we had tried to do it before I even went to Transnet. And even after I had left to go to Transnet, there would be occasion to talk about maybe a development or talk about a possibility or whatever needed to be discussed along those lines, which conversations I assume are not part of this investigation.
Well, just to recap from your evidence under the ESCOM work stream, is my understanding correct that you said that your relationship with the Guptas preceded 2011 by a number of years?
Yeah, maybe two. Not the relationship.
Or your interactions
knowing
with
them.
Knowing them.
Yeah, knowing them. Knowing
Yes.
about them, knowing them.
Yeah.
And then when I tried to do this bank and I went to them to ask them if they would be a way that they could assist.
Yes.
And then that's when you can say, and this is after I had left the PIC.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you mentioned 2 years. Are you saying there had been, the relationship with them might have started about 2 years before 2011, but knowing them might have happened a number of years earlier?
Yes, they tried to do deals with
PIC.
the PIC
Yeah.
that we turned down, and in that context.
Okay.
So, sorry, Mr.
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm done.
Molefe, please, I just want you to answer my question and then we can move on. So in the years that you were the GC of Transnet, 2011 to 15, in an average month, how many times would you go to the Gupta residence?
I don't know, Chair, because we can't talk of an average month. Maybe in 1 month I'd go 3 times, and then don't go for 6 months, and then maybe go once. Maybe it was sporadic.
Yes.
It's difficult to.
Well, then let's make it in a 6-month period.
It's difficult to attach an average to it.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe once a month, or on average.
Once
over
a
a
month.
6-month period, or over a 12-month.
over a 5-year period.
No, I don't know.
I'm sure you went there more than that because that's only 60 times.
Because it's not linear as well. So
Sorry?
it's not linear. So you can't take, if I say that I went there 2 times every 6 months, you can't say that over a 5-year period I went 2 times 6 months times 4.
Well,
Yeah.
seems that you went there, even on those calculations, very often. But let me just ask you this, or perhaps put to you this.
But Mr. Mabek, I don't know how you arrive at these conclusions that you are now putting into the record as if they are evidence.
Well, I'm going to use your own maths. You say, well, could be once a month, twice a month, whatever. But over a 5-year period, that mounts up, Mr. Molefe. It's on a, as you say, you've lost count how many times you went because you went there so often, not because you went there so little. Correct?
Yeah, I understand. I understand mathematics
Yes,
is
all right.
is a complex subject, maybe for you, Mr. Maybach. But I also said you cannot impute a linear relationship,
No, that's
which means
fine.
that you cannot, therefore, draw a graph.
Well, let's try
Because
and
if you
get...
drew the graph,
Yeah.
you would arrive at a conclusion that I was there last month.
Let's deal with some of the evidence and try and get to some of the maths.
Yes.
Witness 1 says that he took you to Saxonwold 11 times in 14 months between July 2011 and September 2012. Would you accept that?
Yes, but who is witness 1?
No, but would you accept that
Yes,
you would have gone there?
it may well be true.
Yes. So that gets us to about the once a month, as you
Yes,
said.
yes.
Right. And
But
witness...
then, you see, the thing about linearity is
It was-
that maybe during that period, it was
Yeah.
11 times over a 14-month period.
Yeah.
Maybe in the next 14 months, I went there twice or thrice.
No, but you went there more than 11 times because witness 2 actually says that when he went there, he saw you there now not in your official car, but in your private car. So do you accept that you would go to the Gupta compound, sometimes driven there?
That was witness 3.
Sorry, just do you accept that you went
No,
there?
but it was not witness 2, it was witness 3.
Witness
Witness 2
3.
never mentioned my name.
All right, I think you may be right. But you accept that sometimes you went there in an official car, I call that a Transnet car, and on other occasions you went in your private vehicle, correct?
Yes, yes.
All right. So I just want to get a sense of when you say you attended family functions, what sort of functions would that be?
They would have Diwali and some other, whenever they had occasion, they would invite me. Sometimes I'd go, sometimes I wouldn't go.
So whenever they had occasions, they would invite you?
Yes,
Correct?
yes.
Okay. And you said that you would attend private meetings. And I really want to just get a sense of, during the time that you were the GCE of Transnet, for those 4 or 5 years, what sort of private meetings were you having?
To talk about the bank, to talk about developments in the banking sector.
Just raise your voice a bit.
To talk about the bank, to talk about developments in the banking sector, to talk about developments with the perhaps the person that had agreed to help us establish the bank, to talk about different things,
Yes, but
mainly relating to the fact that we had been trying to establish a bank.
Mr. Molefe, you see what I want to ask you about? Are those meetings or are those friendly chats that you would have with your friends? Could you really classify these things as meetings?
Well, a meeting is when two people come together, whether it is on friendly terms or on hostile terms. A meeting is a meeting. It's as in meet.
All right, so let's deal with some other figures.
So I was not really going into different classifications of meetings in terms of the literature.
The public protector found that between August and November of 2015, you visited the Saxonwold area 19 times. You remember that?
I remember that. That is what the public protector said.
So that's 4 months, 19 times.
That is what the public protector said.
Could that have been correct, possibly? Maybe when you're not following the linear approach, perhaps in these months you went there more often.
Chairperson, if you go into my affidavit,
Yes.
you will see that I deal with that specific issue.
I know that you do say you went to the Gupta residence several times. I saw that.
I went several times, but then on the public protector's report, I engaged a communication specialist who I gave authority to go and get my telephone records. And he says in his report that the public protector's report was wrong because in one instance, it's in my evidence. I went.
Is it attached to your affidavit?
It's attached to my affidavit.
Okay, Mr. Mayberg, do you want to assist him to?
Sorry, it's attached to my ESCOM affidavit.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So perhaps I've missed something very interesting.
Yes. But if you go and check my ESCOM affidavit,
Yes.
I deal with that and the report of the telecommunications specialist.
All right.
He says in one instance, in 20 minutes, I made, I think, 3 calls and received about, I made 2 calls and received about 9 calls. And the public protector counted that in 20 minutes, in the Saxonwold area. And the public protector counted that as 11 different visits to the Saxonwold area. And the specialist, it's in the, perhaps that is why the ESCOM stream never asked me about the public protector's report, because it actually arose when I was at ESCOM. And perhaps because they saw that the only reason I could fathom for them not being interested in the public protector's report was that I actually explained quite well the flaws in the public protector's report.
That was, of course, in 2015.
Maybe Mr. Mayberg, it would help if you went and read my response in the ESCOM stream to the public protector's report and the affidavit of the telephone specialist.
All right, well, if you just give me a second, of course, that was in 2015, where the public protector gave or made those findings in respect of the period when you were at ESCOM. But can I just ask you...
And the specialist pointed out that That report of the public protector relating to my telephone call
Can I ask you?
was erroneous.
All right.
It
Well, fair enough.
had errors.
So how many times did you then, when you were at Eskom, how often would you go to the Guptas? Was it more or less than when you were at Transnet? Just simply.
I don't know.
Oh,
Really, it's
you
difficult.
don't know.
But I don't think that there was a discernible change in pattern when I went to Eskom.
Yes.
There was yeah.
It does seem, from what I can see, that things carried on where they left off, really.
Where did you see that?
From Transnet to Eskom, we'll come to that.
Yes, I don't deny that I did go to the residence, even when I was at Eskom.
And how often?
Basically, I'm sorry, what you are saying is, as far as you are concerned, the frequency of your visit to the Gupta residence when you were at Transnet was no different from the frequency of your visits to the Gupta residence when you were at Eskom.
I can't recall that there was a change in
Yes.
pattern or attitude.
Okay. All right.
So, there was a need for you to have a series of meetings. I take it you would also meet with AJ Gupta then outside of the Saxonwold residence.
Yeah, that did happen.
Yeah. And was it as often?
No.
And I take it that you would have reciprocated then when it came to entertaining the Guptas. It wasn't a one-way street. I mean,
Yes.
when they invited you to family functions, as you put it, every time, or on each occasion, they would invite you. Sometimes you would go, sometimes you wouldn't. I assume you reciprocated yourself.
They did come to my house.
Yes.
Once, several times.
Yes. And what sort of family functions would you have invited them to?
No, I hardly ever had functions at my house, but when I do have, for example, occasion to cook a dinner, I would maybe once in a while invite them over for dinner.
And how often would you speak on the phone to AJ Gupta?
I don't know, Chairperson. Because part of the problem, because I wasn't keeping a tab, but part of the problem was that, according to the telephone specialist, the public protector's report counted incidents where the phone wasn't answered and where messages were left.
I'm asking you, Mr. Molefe.
I didn't keep a tab. I don't know how.
No,
often it
but
was.
you see, is it that you don't know or you don't want to assist us? I mean, you're a very intelligent person, and your contact with the Guptas, it doesn't just arise
No,
now.
but-
So
but-
if you don't mind me finishing, please.
But Mr.
It's
Maibek,
something that you
Hang on,
have-
Mr. Molefe.
Mr. Maibek, it is not necessary to patronize me.
Hang on, Mr.
Please don't patronize me.
Molefe. Let Mr. Maibek finish, and then you
Yes,
can
but
respond.
Chairperson, I take exception to being patronized by
Yes.
Mr. Maibek saying that I'm an intelligent person and so on and so. That is patronizing.
Yes, but I'm simply saying, when you get a chance to respond, then you can take the point.
Well, when I
Mr.
get a
Maibek.
chance to respond, I must tell him that he's patronizing.
I'm saying, if you want to say anything in response
I
to
will
what
say
he's
that.
saying, you can say what you want to say, and then we'll take it from there.
Mr. Molefe, it's not my intention to patronize you, and if you interpreted my question in that way, I do apologize. But what I really want to get at here is for you simply to tell us, don't worry about the public protector, you've got your concerns about her report and you say it's wrong. Asking you, during the time that you were the GCE of Transnet, those 4 or 5 years, typically how often would you speak to AJ Gupta on the telephone? Now, we've managed to deal with how often you visited the compound. I want to get a sense, please, from you,
Yes.
as to how often you would speak to him on the phone.
Chairperson?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, no. Mr. Molefe has already given an answer. He said he did not keep a tab. So that is the answer he has given.
Yes, but I think Mr. Maibek accepts that he might not have kept a tab, but wants him to see whether he cannot give us a sense in the same way as he did with regard to the visits. Because with regard to the visits, he also didn't keep a tab, but nevertheless, he was able to give a sense. I think that's what Mr. Maibek is trying to
It
get.
depended on the issues at the particular point in time. He would call, or I would call if I had something that crossed my mind about a particular issue. I can't remember how often we spoke, but we did speak.
And I assume you would accept you spoke often.
And I actually hardly ever spoke to the other two brothers. It was just really Mr. AJ that had been interested in the bank.
All right. Now, I think...
Because the public protector also refers to a telephone call from Mr. Atul Gupta. And when we checked my phone records, we found that Mr. Atul Gupta did call. The call was never answered, and I never returned the call. And the public protector counted it as a phone call from Mr. Atul Gupta to me.
Now, Mr. Molefe, I think you might have touched on this before. That was the evidence of Mr. Jonas. I think it also featured in the Eskom stream.
Mr. who?
Mr. Jonas, where he's commenting on a meeting that he attended with the Guptas. And he said that Mr. Gupta...
I don't recall the evidence of Mr. Jones.
Okay.
Who is Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones, this passage was put to you, from what I understand, during...
Mr. Jones?
Just if you bear with me. Mr. Jonas goes to a meeting with the
Oh,
Guptas.
Jonas.
They offer him the position of finance minister.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Jonas. I thought you said
I was
Jonas.
also trying to
I beg your pardon.
think which witness.
All right.
Yeah, it must
Oh,
be
Mr.
Jonas.
Jonas.
All right.
Yes.
So, and I think you might have already referred to this in passing, but I'll just read what he said. He said, now he's referring to Mr. Gupta, that they had worked closely with a number of people, including Lynn Brown and Brian Molefe, and as a result, they were protected. In other words, those people who worked with them are protected. He said that Mr. Molefe is very safe, and that his career path is very clear, and that no one would touch him, and that I'd be safe too. I think this passage has been put to you. It's quite startling, isn't it?
Well,
I put that to you, even though I didn't quote, but the gist of it when you were giving evidence.
Chairperson, I can't comment on Mr. Jonas's evidence. I mean, I wasn't there. He says somebody who he can't say for sure it was said all of those things. And I said I couldn't comment on it, but what I could comment on was my career. And when you did put it to me, Chairperson, I said to you that I do not think that my career required assistance from a person that Mr. Jonas had met on a corridor somewhere.
I've actually reflected on that answer of yours, and I really don't understand it, because it's not about whether you needed the Guptas.
Yes.
I mean, firstly, they may have needed you.
You reflected on it.
Yeah, I've reflected on the evidence that you gave, and the answer, it was published in the newspaper, where it was reported as you saying, look, I don't need these people, I've got a lot of experience, and I had my career path.
I can't comment on your reflections.
But that's not the issue here. You accept that perhaps the Guptas needed you.
I don't know, Chairperson.
And a lot of...
No, I don't know that the Guptas needed me.
Mr. Molefe, this passage really does show that you were very much in the Gupta camp.
This passage from Mr. Jonas,
yeah.
the story that he was told by somebody in a corridor, a person who he does not really recall.
Not in a corridor, in a meeting at the Gupta residence.
I seem to recall that somebody was passing in a corridor and they said this to him.
Well, there are two versions.
And in fact, he still doesn't recall, even with your version, Chairperson. He says it might have been.
Yeah, but let me tell you what the versions are. On his version, he had a meeting at the Gupta residence on the 23rd of October 2015 in the afternoon, after lunch. And at that meeting were him, Suzanne Zuma, Mr. Hlongwana, and a Gupta brother. It is true that he was not sure which of the Gupta brothers, but what has been established through the evidence of Mr. Duduzane Zuma and maybe Mr. Hlongwane, is that the Gupta brother who was at the Gupta residence on that day is Mr. Tony Gupta. That's where he says the discussion was. But Mr. Duduzane Zuma and Mr. Hlongwane deny that a Gupta brother attended that meeting and that there was the kind of discussion that Mr. Jonas says took place in that meeting with a Gupta brother. And they simply say Mr. Tony Gupta popped in at some stage while they, that is Mr. Duduzane Zuma and Mr. Hlongwane, were having a meeting with Mr. Jonas, popped in to communicate something to Mr. Duduzane Zuma and then left. Those are the two versions.
So this statement that was mentioned by one of the Gupta brothers to Mr. Jonas, was it done in that meeting?
Yes,
According
to Mr. Jonas.
Did Mr. Hlongwane or Mr. Duduzane Zuma get to hear this person talking like this, and do they confirm?
They deny that such a discussion took place between Mr. Jonas and any Gupta brother.
Do both of them deny it?
Both of them denied.
But Chairperson, I fail to understand how the Commission continues to attach such value to this statement by Mr. Jonas that has not been corroborated by people who were present.
But you see, Mr. Molefe, I think you seem not to understand something very fundamental about the Commission.
Yes.
The Commission is continuing to investigate. The Commission has not made any findings. The Commission has not accepted anybody's version. That is why even when I put that version to you when you were giving evidence under the ESCOM work stream, I said something to the effect that this is what Mr. Jonas said, and if what he said is true, then blah, 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 blah. So we haven't accepted that Mr. Jonas' version is true. We haven't accepted that Mr. Duduzane Zuma's version and Mr. Hlongwane's version is true. We're still probing as to what may be true and what may not be true. And the findings will be made later.
But Chairperson, you see, that statement, as is put by Mr. Jonas, that is not corroborated, if it were true, would advance a particular narrative that would excite Mr. Maybeck as well. So, to the extent that it looks like, I mean, I've had it repeated, even in my absence here in the Commission, during the evidence of others, that you have said, but Mr. Jonas says, but Mr. Jonas says. Even now it is, and the feeling that I have is that, but that statement of Mr. Jonas that was said by this person, that has not been corroborated, that was in any event hearsay evidence, it looks like the Commission attaches a lot of weight to it. Just like Mr. Bester's statement, that I doubt, I don't know, maybe it has been corroborated, that while we were at the dinner, it is indeed true that Mr. Salim Essa did mention this. So I don't know if there were any attempts to corroborate this evidence that I'm now being confronted with, that I now have to respond to, on the basis of which I'm now being ridiculed.
But you see, nobody's ridiculing you, Mr. Molefe, if that's the word you used just now. Nobody is ridiculing you. The attempt is to get your input on how you see things and on what you know. And it's up to you to say, but I hear what you say, Mr. Jonas said, but I would say this Commission should reject that evidence of Mr. Jonas because there are two witnesses who deny what he says happened. That kind of thing. That's the response.
But I have said that, and Mr. Maybeck is repeating it with glee.
But that's because just because you say it doesn't mean we immediately accept that, okay, Mr. Brian Molefe has said now.
But when Mr. Jonas says it, it's accepted immediately.
But when that is put to you, certainly when I put it, and I think when Mr. Maybeck puts it, It's on the basis to say, if we were to accept, if it was to be accepted that what he said was true, but whether it will ultimately be accepted as true is something that will be seen when all the evidence has been heard. The idea is to test the soundness of various aspects of evidence.
Yes. Well, all I was suggesting, Chairperson, was that perhaps if we want to check if that is true, we should ask the people who were present to corroborate what Mr. Jonas was saying. And if they can't corroborate it, or if no attempt has been made to corroborate from the people who were present, it is really unfair to be asking me, who was not present, what if I think that is true.
Well, you see, Mr. Molefe.
Yes, sir.
If, for example, some of the propositions that Mr. Maibek puts to you, because they are based on saying, well, maybe this is how the evidence should be looked at. If you were not to put that to you, but later on he presents arguments to me to say you must reject Mr. Molefe's evidence that he knew nothing about this because of ABCD, and he never gave you a chance to deal with those propositions, you may have a case to say that he was unfair to me. Why didn't he put this to me so that I could show how flawed the proposition was? That kind of. So the idea is just to make sure that, one, there is fairness to you. But if you say, look, I can't, I don't know that, or I can't answer that, it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, Chairperson, just for the record also, I can't answer what happened that day with Mr. Jonas.
Okay.
All right. Was there a time when you stopped going to the Saxonwold residence of the Guptas?
I can't remember making that a conscious decision, but maybe there was a time when I frequented the place.
Did you go there up until they fled to Dubai?
No. I suppose, Chairperson, I can't say that I had decided not to go there because I was afraid of the accusations and so on and so forth. But there was a time when I was not going to their residence anymore.
Yes, but what caused you to stop going?
I don't know, Chairperson. I think we just drifted apart.
Sorry?
We just drifted apart.
Do you know whether you went there after the public protector's report?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I did. After the public protector's report, I think I did.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Well, maybe I can take this opportunity to ask a question relating to the public protector's report. My recollection is that when you reacted to the public protector's report, you didn't want to say whether or not you had been to the Gupta residence, and that you said there may be, or there was a ship in there, although I think you were maybe smiling or laughing, so maybe that was not serious. Am I correct to say at that stage you didn't say, well, it's true, I have been there and I've been there many times?
No, the public protector's report said Mr. Molefe's telephone records place him in the Saxonwold area, not at the Gupta residence.
Yes.
If actually the public protector had interviewed me and allowed me the opportunity to ask, as the Act demands, questions about the evidence that she had, I would have asked her, when you say I was in the Saxonwold area, what technology did you use to place me there? How did you really do it? Because it doesn't really say how the telephone records placed me there. But when I was reacting to it at the time, I said that on that morning, I think we were giving ESCOM financial advice. I walked into the ESCOM executive committee meeting. And I sat there with the whole executive. I actually kept quiet for a few seconds. And then I said, the public protector says I was in the Saxon World area. And that means that I was at the Gupta residence. Can somebody balance me here? If I was in the Saxon World area, my telephone records I was in the Saxon World area, does that mean that I was at the Gupta residence? I wasn't saying I was there or I was not there. I was just saying the veracity of the public protector's claim that I was at the Gupta residence. And then one member of the executive, Mr. Chose Chweu, and I've said it over and over again, Mr. Chose Chweu says, that's ridiculous, because actually in that area there is a shebeen. And if she had asked me, she would have seen that I always go to a shebeen. So I said, Chose, really? And he said, yes. And then later on in the afternoon, when I was talking about it, during the results announcement, I said, you know, Chose here says there is a shebeen there. There is a shebeen there. He says there is a shebeen there. And that if they had asked him, they would have found that, in fact, there is a shebeen there. I was saying what Chose had said in the morning. And then I then also said, so using this logic, the public protector, if she had looked at my phone record, she would have found that every day I pass on the N1 in Midrand to go home in the morning and in the afternoon. And I am less than 1.5 kilometers away from a place called Teasers in Midrand. She might as well have come to the conclusion that every day, from Monday to Friday, in the morning and in the evening, I go to Teasers. But that would have been wrong. Her logic is wrong. So I did not say that there was a shebeen. In fact, the Sunday Times did publish an article that says that Mr. Molefe said he was at the shebeen. And I challenged it with the press ombudsman. Justice Molefe gave a ruling. And he said, after listening carefully to what Mr. Molefe had said, he never said he was at the shebeen in Saxon World. And yet, despite all of that, the media went on and on and on and on about the shebeen. Chairperson, I also said in that meeting that at ESCOM, there was a man in Cape Town, I just forget his name now, who had been found to have tampered with his meter. Electricity.
Tampered with?
With his electricity meter. You know, the meter that measures how much electricity.
Yeah.
So they tampered with it so that it doesn't register the units as it's running. So the ESCOM officials went to his house and found that the meter had been tampered with. And then he admitted to it. And they found him guilty, and they fined him, I think, 10,000 rand. And he paid it. And a few months later, they came to his house to check his meter again. And they found that it had been tampered with. And on the spot, they disconnected his electricity and fined him again. And refused to reconnect him until he had paid his fine, which was, I think, was double what the fine had been. And then
What's the point about that story?
And then the person went to the public protector to complain, to Limadonsel, to complain that he's been disconnected from the grid.
Yes, but what's the relevance of that story to what you are dealing with?
You will hear it when I get to the end.
Yes, but I don't want you to take too long in case after 30 minutes I find that it's not relevant.
No, Chairperson, I've been waiting 5.5 years to tell this story.
Yes, but I don't want you to take too long. If you can indicate to me this is the relevance
Yes,
that will help.
but then the public protector found that the fact that that guy had been found to have been tampering with his meter before does not mean that he had now been tampering with the meter, and that ESCOM should have had a process to determine whether or not he had been tampering with the meter. And she said some prophetic words in that finding. She says, the fact that a person is known to be a goat thief, it does not mean that when you see him next to a head of goats, that he has stolen the goats. The fact that a known goat thief is walking next to sheep, to the goats, does not mean that he has stolen the goats. And I said, even at that time in 2016, that it is strange then, that if the public protector places me in Saxon world, next to the proverbial head of sheep or goats, it means that I was doing something wrong.
But
so that is the relevance of the story, that the public protector herself had come to a conclusion without due process.
Yes.
Something that she had found us guilty of doing as ESCOM in the past.
But you knew yourself at the time in 2016 that even though she might have been talking about your telephone records or cell phone records reflecting that you were on a number of occasions in the vicinity of or in Saxon Well.
Yes.
You knew that she was really trying to look at to what extent there may have been a relationship between yourself and the Guptas, and you knew that you had frequented the residence several times, as you put it. Is that right?
No, Chairperson. What I knew at the time was that Glencoe had been to her, and that we were having a colossal fight with Glencoe, and that she had chosen to listen to them, and that this narrative had been manufactured and created by Glencoe and peddled in the media. As I said, when I was giving evidence in ESCOM, you'd be surprised what 1 billion rand can achieve. And for them, 1 billion rand was nothing.
Yes, but you are not suggesting to me, Mr. Molefe, are you, that in 2016, when you were reacting to the public protector's report, you didn't know that you had been to the Gupta residence several times?
Yes.
You accept that you had been?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Chairperson, what I did know is that nobody had proven any impropriety.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And that was the whole point of the whole thing, to suggest that there had been impropriety. That is why I talk about the story of the man walking next to the sheep. Doesn't mean he's stolen them.
Yes.
So to suggest impropriety, you had to do much more than what the public protector did. She basically, Chairperson, called my name over the coals and caused my name to be tarnished without a proper investigation.
Mr. Maybeck?
Thank you.
Mr. Maybeck, before you continue, are we all of the same understanding that if necessary, we will go into the evening with Mr. Molefe's evidence? Let me start with you, Mr. Molefe.
Chair, we can
From
go,
your side, you have no problem with that?
we can go until midnight, Chair.
Yes, okay. Counsel for Mr. Molefe, that's fine with you as well?
We shouldn't have any problem with that.
Okay, all right. Mr. Maybeck, no problem?
Well, I can't be the odd one out, I suppose.
Do you think we conspired to make sure we put you into a corner where you can't come out?
It's Mr. Molefe's narrative.
Okay, all right, let's continue.
Thank you. So you're not able to put a date, even an approximate date, when you stopped going to the Gupta residence?
Yes, I can't put it there. Yeah, I suppose by the time I left ESCOM, or after I had left ESCOM, I really didn't frequent the residence.
When you look back, having heard the evidence that's been presented in this commission, do you feel at all betrayed by the Guptas? Do you feel that you were perhaps played by them?
I don't know, Chair, that they played me. Maybe they did, I don't know. But what I do feel, what I definitely feel, is that there have been suggestions that I did things that are wrong, and there has not been evidence to show exactly what it is that I did wrong. I have no regrets that I knew the Guptas. I have no regrets that I had gone to their house, that I had spoken to them over the phone. I was not the only South African that did that. However, I also feel that for anyone to suggest that I was involved in wrongdoing, they have to come with proper evidence. And that has not been forthcoming. What has been forthcoming is this narrative, as I put it, that you were walking too close to the sheep, to the proverbial goats.
That, I think, is perhaps a different question. What is your answer to whether you feel betrayed by the Guptas? Is it yes or no?
No, I feel that I was done in by the public protector. The public protector.
So you don't feel betrayed by the Guptas?
No, the person who was supposed to protect me from this onslaught that happened because of evidence, or in the absence of evidence. The person that was supposed to protect me was a public protector.
So
the Guptas, I don't know, they may have done what they did, but I was not part of it. So I don't...
Mr. Molefe, that's why I don't really understand your answer. Assume for a moment that they did what they did. And there you were at the Gupta compound. There you were, a friend of theirs.
Yes.
On your version, they weren't being transparent with you. They weren't telling you what was happening. They played you. Do you not feel betrayed at all by them?
Jefferson, the thing that makes me feel betrayed is I feel like somebody walked into the Gupta residence and they had a beef with them. Maybe let's say it was the police or the Hawks or whoever. And then all they did was to open fire and kill everything that was moving there, including myself. When they didn't ask, why are you here? What are you doing here? And this is what you're doing, and this is what is wrong about your being here. So I feel like the public protector just went in there and just opened fire,
But Mr.
put
Molefe,
a machine gun on rapid fire, and just shot at everything that was moving.
you're not answering my question because you, again, going to your culpability. I'm not asking you about your culpability. Let's assume for a moment that you're completely innocent and you didn't know anything about this. My question is, surely you must feel betrayed by the Guptas.
But
There, assuming for a moment that they were involved in large-scale money laundering from the very business that you were in charge of, and they didn't tell you this, and you fostered this 4-year relationship, it seems to me the obvious answer must be to the chairperson, I can't believe that these people did this to me. I feel betrayed.
You and I are wired differently.
Chairperson,
Yes.
Mr. Maybeck makes a conclusion that the Guptas were involved in money laundering.
He says, on the assumption, as I understood him, he said, let's assume that they were involved in money laundering, among other things, and let's assume that Mr. Molefe is innocent and was not involved on that. So that, as I understood it, that's how he started his question, his proposition. Did you hear it differently?
Yeah, no, I heard differently.
Okay, maybe let's just check with Mr. Molefe. Mr. Molefe.
Well, certainly it was my intention to put it in that qualified way,
Yes.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairperson.
okay.
But Chairperson, if I'm found with somebody who stole a car, for example.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was still your counsel talking.
Oh, sorry.
So it's you. No. He is done, but for some reason I thought he was continuing.
That's why I say, Mr. Molefe, I think we're wired differently.
But I'm sorry, Mr. Molefe. Let's go back to what Mr. Moybeck's question was, because there is a question of whether he made assumptions or not. So then you can answer. Let's just get that right. Mr. Molefe.
There was.
So
Mr. Molefe says.
I'm going to try and
Yeah,
put my question
yeah.
again,
Yeah.
Mr. Molefe, and then we need to move on. I'm going to ask you to try and make a distinction between your culpability and the fact that you feel
If any.
that you feel you were shot down by the public protector. That's what I'm dealing with now. Let's assume that you are completely innocent. Let's assume for a moment that the Guptas were involved in large-scale money laundering from your business. We know that you were friendly with them. Surely then you must feel betrayed by them.
Yeah. So that's why I say you and I are wired differently. The way that I think about that question is, let's assume that I'm walking down the street with somebody who stole a car. And then the police come. And without asking any questions, arrest both of us and go and torture both of us without asking me or trying to establish, even from the person that I'm arrested with,
Yes.
my culpability. And then put me through torture, prison, whatever, maybe even succeed in getting me sentenced to prison. Who do you become angry with? Is it the guy that you're walking with in the street, or is it the police who did not do their job? And that is why I say that the person who betrayed me is the public protector, because she should have known, as she said in the case of the guy in Cape Town, that you need proper investigation before you drag somebody's name into the arena where you are fighting corruption.
So can we record that you don't feel betrayed by the Guptas? Short point. Correct?
I feel betrayed by the public protector.
And you don't feel betrayed by the Guptas?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I must make sure I understand that correctly, Mr. Molefe, because I don't want to attribute to you something that you didn't say or mean. You seem to be saying, if you are friends with somebody and you are in charge of an entity such as Transnet, and that friend of yours goes behind your back and effectively steals money from Transnet, the entity of which you're in charge, you won't feel that that friend of yours has betrayed you.
By the way, we are still going to give evidence about the stealing of the money.
No, let's talk the general proposition.
Oh, yeah.
Are you saying that you would not feel that your friend has betrayed you?
If eventually there is proof beyond reasonable doubt, or if even on the basis of the commission, if there is finding that there was indeed wrongdoing, then I will feel betrayed. The Constitution, Chair, says people must be innocent until proven guilty. The way that we are approaching this whole problem of the Guptas is that guilt has already been ascribed before there has been proper processes.
Well, I've been saying to you that no findings have been made.
Yes.
I've been saying that quite a few times, but we are probing to see what aspects of whose evidence are sound or are probably true. And sometimes at this stage, I might think part of what you say is true, but later on when I sit down and having had other witnesses, I might change my mind. So
Yeah.
findings have not been made, but we are probing, we are
Yes,
testing.
and Chairperson, I said one day in Parliament, when I was asked a similar question about the Guptas, I said, you may be ascribing guilt to them. And you say they did wrong things and so on. And you may well be right. But until there has been proper processes of ascertaining their guilt, then, it's like saying somebody killed somebody. And this person that killed somebody, we know who this person is. You're asking me,
I think I understand what
do you
you're
feel
saying,
that
Mr.
the
Molefe.
murderer betrayed you when the guy who committed the murder or alleged to have committed the murder has not been convicted of murder? There may well be evidence that they did things that are wrong. But Chairperson, let me, to answer Mr. Maibek's question maybe correctly then. The day that you make your findings, and the day that they have been arrested and been put in prison and have been found guilty in terms of the laws of our land, perhaps at that point I will feel betrayed. But at the moment, I really take the constitutional principle of not guilty until found guilty very seriously. I said this to Parliament once, that really I suspect the thing that has captured me is our constitution. It's our constitution that even the Guptas have rights in terms of our constitution. And that was the spirit of our constitution. Because what Parliament was saying was that, these people have done this, they've done this, and so on and so forth. Now there are allegations that they stole money and so on and so on. It may well be true, but let us wait for the right legal process to unfold. Perhaps at that point, Mr. Maibek, you can ask me, do you feel betrayed? And I will say, now I really feel betrayed. But for now, I cannot be sitting here and agreeing with you that they are guilty. Because, like me, they haven't been put through a proper legal process by a forum that is recognized by our law and our constitution.
But you know, of course, that they fled the country, and you probably also know that they said in affidavits that were read out in an open hearing of the commission that they would never come back to this country, and they didn't want to subject themselves to legal processes in this country because they think that, among others, the Hawks and the NPA are unfair to them. So that's the attitude they conveyed to this commission in 2018 or 2019 when they applied for leave to cross-examine.
Yes, and that their assets were attached and subsequently returned because I don't know what the judge found. After the assets were attached and after a proper legal process, they were returned. So I would rather wait for the courts where
you may wait forever because they might never come back. They fled the country. The legal system, Mr. Molefe.
It's a very interesting constitutional question, Chair.
Hang on.
Of a person who is not guilty until proven guilty. If that person flees, does that suddenly mean that you can treat them as being guilty?
Yes. No, I just want to say this, Mr. Molefe. It's quite interesting that you refer to the position that initially their assets were attached, but then later on their assets were returned to them. The legal system, which made sure that if initially their assets were taken from them wrongly, were returned to them. The very system, that legal system that made sure they were returned to them. That's the system they don't trust. That's the system that they don't want to come back to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact that they don't want to come back, or that they are there like Bushiri, they have left the country. In terms of our constitution that has captured, can we then say, let's treat these people as if they are guilty?
Mr. Mybeck?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Molefe, when you look back at your time as the GC of Transnet, perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently?
As the GCE of Transnet, yes.
What?
Perhaps I shouldn't have gone to ESCOM at the time when I was asked to go to ESCOM. Perhaps I was too disciplined and to agree to go to ESCOM. Because, Chairperson, I really believed in the market demand strategy. I thought it was a phenomenal program where we were involved in a capital program to buy locomotives, to buy cranes for the ports, to finalize the pipeline, to make a Transnet a world-class company. Transnet was returning to profitability. And sometimes my regret is that I was never given the opportunity to see that project come to finality. One of the things that we were doing at Transnet, Chairperson, is that we were building a locomotive that would be made in South Africa. That locomotive was built. We had a very exciting project at the CSIR with young engineers that were putting together a locomotive of our own. In fact, our plan was not to finish the acquisition in terms of the 1064, was to replace the tail end of the 1064 with our own made in South Africa locomotive. That locomotive was built and commissioned, but I don't know where it is now. So perhaps maybe my regret is maybe I should have stayed to see the market demand strategy to finality. Sometime after I had left, the volumes that we had picked up in the transportation of volumes on the general freight business and coal line and the iron ore line, the systems that we put up to improve operational efficiencies were lost. Crane movements at the ports had increased phenomenally when I was there to about 30 moves per hour. I'm told that they are nowhere near that at the moment, and that the Port of Durban, for example, has gone back to where it was before I arrived at Transnet.
Try and go closer to the mic. I think some of your words are being swallowed. You are swallowing.
Yes. So that is my regret,
All right.
that perhaps I should have stayed.
You should have stayed. Is that the only thing?
Yes.
Because I just wanted to put to you, there's been evidence by Dr. Molefe, people like Mr. Fulming, who have explained...
Which Dr. Molefe?
Popo Molefe.
Or is Dr. Molefe?
I understand, sir. Sorry, have I got it mixed up?
No, because my father is also Dr. Molefe.
All right. Well, I'm
and
not
sometimes
referring,
also
you can probably be assured I'm not referring to your father.
Yeah, and people also refer me to Dr. Molefe, but I frown on it because it's just an honorary doctorate.
But it's Popo Molefe. He's given evidence and he's filed an affidavit where he's explained the radical remedial action that had to be taken within Transnet to right the ship in the wake of you and then Mr. Gama being the GCE.
He says he has explained what?
That radical remedial action had to be taken.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Well, Mr. Fulming, at a simple level, came and explained the changes that had to be made to the PPM, the Procurement Procedures Manual, so as to learn lessons and to adapt from what had gone wrong in the past
The changes in the PPM,
Yeah.
which changes in particular?
Well, I'm going to come to his evidence in time about confinement, single source contracts, confidential confinements, many things that you were involved in. But as I understand it, I ask you that question. I ask you to introspect and to tell the chairperson whether you would have done anything differently or better. And what you say to us is, well, actually, you would have just stayed there longer.
Yes, yes. I think
see.
that sometimes I feel that if I'd stayed there longer, we would have continued the successes that we were experiencing on the operational side of the business.
Yes, I'm not just talking about the operational side, Mr.
But I
Molefe.
am.
Right.
Yeah, I'm saying that the successes that we achieved on the operational side, those successes are the things that positively contribute to
And what about other parts of the
economic
business?
growth.
Mr. Myberg, let him finish.
I beg your pardon.
That-
Finish your
that-
answer, Mr.
The operational
Molefe.
side is the side that contributes to growth in the economy. Transnet was not, from an operational point of view, what it used to be when I arrived at Transnet, by the time I left.
Now,
And that would have been seen in the financials as well.
Mr. Molefe, turning to a different subject, you received many.
Maybe now that you're going to another subject, we should take a short adjournment. It's 4 o'clock. Let's take a 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back. We adjourn.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue.
Thank you.
How is the heat on that side of the house?
I think it's fine,
It's
Chairperson.
fine, okay. So I think it's this side. But it's fine, we don't have to switch on the aircon as long as it's fine that side. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you. Mr. Molefe, I wanted just to change gears now and perhaps deal with the market demand strategy. I think you were speaking about that a little earlier.
Yes.
Just for the purposes of the record, I'll just ask you to confirm. As I understand it, it's a 300 billion rand 7-year capital investment program that sought to expand South Africa's rail, port and pipeline infrastructure, and the majority of that investment was targeted at freight rail operations. Is that correct?
Yes, the majority, yes. Right, right.
And as I understand it, it was announced in April 2011, shortly after you joined Transnet. Is that right? With the investment commencing in April the next year.
I can't remember exactly when it was announced, but yes, it was after I had been at.
So by the time you left Transnet, one was 3 years into the MDS.
Yes.
And I assume that the MDS must have been amongst your most important tasks, the running of that strategy, that program.
It was the most important thing, number one.
And I assume it must have been a very exciting initiative to be in charge of an organization that had such massive funds available to it for investment and expansion.
It was exciting to be in charge of an organization that had a plan.
And I suppose also onerous. I mean, it brought with it a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders, correct?
Yes, sir. Sleepless
But
nights.
it must have been exciting to be in charge of an organization, not only that had a plan, but also that had funding, because you can't be excited if there's a plan, but there's no funding to execute the plan.
Well, 70% of the MDS was to be funded from operations and 30% from borrowings. But the 70% from operations over the 7-year period included from improved operations. So what was really stressful about it was that if the operations don't improve during the 7-year period, and we don't realize those funds from operations, then the MDS would also collapse. So it had funds that were based on what we were going to achieve on our success.
Of performance.
Yes, so our performance was a function of the availability of the funds. But also the markets would not give us the money, the 30% borrowings, if we fail in the first couple of years.
Okay.
And then also, by way of an introductory topic, I just want to ask you a few questions about the BADC and delegations of authority. As I understand the evidence, historically the board of directors, including subcommittees, didn't have any delegated authority for procurement-related activities, with there being a decentralized procurement system in place. And this then changed in 2011, with the board acquiring procurement powers and a special subcommittee of the board being created, the Board Acquisition and Disposal Committee, the BADC. Is that a fair summary to the best of your knowledge?
When I joined Transnet, it had a BADC. And this was not unusual for a board to have a oversight of procurement. Actually, now that you mention it, I can't remember that Transnet had a history of not having a BADC. It never occurred to me that this was new and that it never existed before. But when I joined, there was a BADC that had that oversaw procurement activity.
All right. Well, the evidence that I've seen says that in 2011 the board acquired procurement powers and the BADC was established.
When in 2011?
In 2011, I presume that might have been before you joined.
So that must have been in January.
So
Because
do I
I joined in, I think, February.
Yeah. So do I understand your evidence to be that by the time you joined Transnet,
There was a BADC.
the BADC was already there?
Yes.
Some of the stuff that I put to you might have been before your time.
Yes.
Then, as I understand the evidence, really in step with the MDS, the BADC's approval authority was increased in 2012. I think it went up to 2 billion, with the board being required to approve tenders above this. Does
Yes,
that accord with your recollection?
I saw that, but according to the evidence that you have, who increased the BADC's authority?
I don't know from the evidence that I've read. But does that accord with your recollection that the BADC's authority was upped to 2 billion in 2012?
I can't specifically recall that, Chair,
All right.
but you see, it depends on who increased it. So if it was the board, and if it is true that the BADC's authority was increased by the board, then the board had authority to do so.
Yes. Now, I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with this. I'm just, as we go into the big procurement tenders, just by way of background, I wanted to deal with the MDS and the BADC and delegations of authority. What we do know, as you've already accepted, is that Mr. Sharma was then appointed as the chairperson of the BADC in August 2012.
Yes.
Then in 2013, the evidence that has been led has been to the effect that there was delegated authority to certain individuals to approve high-value transactions. The CFO up to 750 million, and you in your position as the GCE up to 1 billion. You remember that?
Yes.
And effectively what happened is you became, and this is the term, I don't use it in a pejorative way, a one-person acquisition council.
No. That is not true.
You disagree with
I
that?
disagree with that wholly.
All right. And why do you disagree with that?
Because there is nothing that I did at Transnet, even at ESCO, that had not been recommended from
That had not been?
recommended
Oh,
from lower down.
okay.
So the instances where I actually wrote a memo to approve something myself, wrote the memo and then approved it myself, are very, I can't actually even recall one. But everything was originated in the operating units, and they wrote the recommendation that they wanted, and the executives had to recommend it, and only then would I approve. Sometimes not approve. But also, we had a well-functioning executive committee, and that some of the matters, a lot of the matters were referred to the executive committees before they were approved and implemented.
All right. We're going to come to the relevant contracts in a moment, and you are right. Most of them reflect various levels of recommendation, or in some instances, Mr. Singh recommending and you signing. We'll come to that. What we also know from the evidence is that both the BADC and you and Mr. Singh, within your limits of authority, had the power to award tenders on a confinement basis.
Yes, although there was a power to award tenders on a confinement basis, as I say, I would rarely do it without any recommendation.
Yes, now I accept that, but you had the power.
Yes.
Now, what Mr. Fulmink testified to,
Mr. Who?
Mr. Fulmink,
Fulmink.
yes, corporate governance person,
Yes.
The executive manager governments,
Yes.
he testified that the one-man acquisition councils and the widespread use of the confinement process were amongst the areas of concern or problem areas that he identified, which he
Yes.
sought to address in the new updated PPM. Do you accept that that is something that happened?
Mr. Volming is a peacetime hero because he never raised that issue with me when I was there.
Yes. No, I understand that, but he's one of the people that I referred you to just now, that looking back at what happened, Mr. Volming gave evidence that these are changes that we made. We look to tension up and improve the system. I take it you don't dispute that evidence.
Yes, yes.
So for much of my questioning of you, I'm going to really be dealing with your involvement in the procurement of goods and services at Transnet in that context of the MDS, the context of the BADC and the delegation of authority.
But before we proceed, let me help you also with context. The other context about procurement at Transnet was that in the process of procurement, every step there was assurance that was given by assurance teams.
There was assurance.
Assurance
Yeah.
that was given
Yes.
by assurance teams. For example, they had things that they called gates, for example, in the high value term. So there would be the initial sort of process, and then assurance must be given, and then assurance will open the gate to the next phase, and the next phase, and the next phase. So you could not get to from identifying a project of procurement and get to the final payment without assurance.
So are you saying that from the time a need was identified for
Yes.
goods or services
Yes.
to the time of payment,
Yes,
there were various stages in
Yes.
the journey,
yeah.
and at each stage,
There was a gate.
some assurance had to be given
Yes,
that what had happened before that stage
yes,
was in order.
yes.
And that's the point we are making.
Yeah, in fact, those things, we call them gates,
Gates.
that could only be opened by legal and,
Yeah.
internal audit
Yes,
and sometimes external assurance
yes.
that everything so far was right.
Okay.
And that was, for me, that was the most important thing. For example, when you have a tender, so when the bids are submitted, before you open them, the assurance people come. Then you open them. Then you adjudicate. And each time they open the gate.
Okay.
Right. Now, I want to start off by asking you some questions under the heading of procurement of consulting and advisory services.
Yes.
Shall I find that somewhere in his statement or in any document? Or not really?
No,
don't
I
need
think
to
it's
look
a
at-
collection of
Oh,
different
okay.
contracts, which
No, that's fine.
you are familiar with,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. So, most of my questioning relates then to procurement, and I want to start off by procurement of consulting and advisory services, and I want to start with the 1064 transaction advisor contract, the McKinsey Consortium. Now, what the evidence says, and Mr. Molefe, along the way, I'm going to just summarize it for you. You can agree or disagree. A lot of this is really just background to get to
Yes.
the point that I want to get to. The evidence is to the effect that given the magnitude of the 1064 locomotive transaction, Transnet procured, we know, transaction advisors, effectively external consultants,
Yes.
to provide advisory services in respect of 4 different things. Firstly, the validation of the business case. Secondly, technical evaluation and optimization of bids. Thirdly, deal structuring and finance. And then fourthly, procurement advice and legal services. Does that accord with your recollection?
Yes.
All right. And what we then know in relation to the 1064 transaction advisors contract is that in May, or the 30th of May 2012, Transnet issued an RFP to 9 consortiums on a confinement basis. Do you remember that?
Yes, but when the tender was issued to the 9 consortiums, there must have been a memo that was
Yes.
written and recommended. Do you have it there by
Yeah,
any chance?
I don't dispute that.
No, I just wanted to see it for my
I'm
own.
not suggesting for a moment, that, and perhaps I need to also make this point, I'm not suggesting that there was anything wrong in what transpired. I'm trying to get to the point of which I want to question you about.
All right.
So what we know is that an RFP is issued to 9 consortiums on a confinement basis, and I'm not suggesting that there's anything irregular about that.
Yes.
What then happened is on the 27th of July, the contract is awarded to the McKinsey consortium.
Yes.
And it was the main bidder, and it included as a co-bidder and SD partner a concern by the name of Letsema. Do you recall that?
Yes. So it was awarded properly.
Yes, I'm not suggesting.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I'm going to come to the problem in a moment.
Yes.
Then what happens is on the 22nd of August, you approved a memorandum from Mr. Singh advising that Letsema had a conflict of interest and proposing that it be replaced. You remember that?
Yes, I remember there was an issue about the conflict of interest
So
involving Letsema.
if I could ask you please to turn to your file, Exhibit 22.
Exhibit 22.
Start with the bundle, Mr. Or is it the
Bundle
reference?
Bundle 5, I beg your pardon. Exhibit 22.
What's the page number?
405.1.
485.1
405.1, yes.
or 405.
405.1. Mr. Chairperson, I undertook to
Oh, yes.
Mr. Molefe's lawyers to point out to you that from 405.1 through to 405.94, these are documents that were recently added to the bundle. For some reason, there was a problem with the transmission of these documents, and I understand that Mr. Molefe might only have received them last night. The agreement that we have is that I will point that out to you, place it on record. When I take Mr. Molefe to a document, I will place on record too that it's a new document, and obviously if he needs time to reflect on his answers more carefully, we're more than prepared to give it to him.
Yeah.
And we would also like to just express our gratitude to him and his lawyers for not making an issue of this in the interest
Yes.
of proceeding with matters.
Yes, thank you.
So, Mr. Molefe, we had got to the memo of 22 August, and this it is. You will see if you go to page 405.4 that it is sent to you, or there's various levels of authority, but ultimately you see Mr. Singh recommended, and then you ultimately approved it on the 22nd of August 2012, correct?
Yes, it was compiled by Mr. Yusuf Mohammed, recommended by Gary Peter and Anoch Singh.
Yes.
And I approved.
So this was a month or so after the contract had initially been awarded to McKinsey. I just want to go, if I may, to the purpose of the memorandum at page 405.1. It says the purpose of this memorandum is to request approval of the Group Chief Executive for the appointment of the McKinsey Consortium for the complete advisory services and Weber Wenzel for the legal advisory services as transaction advisors on the 1064 tender. 1.1, for the Group Chief Executive to note that McKinsey will be advised to partner another firm with equal or better credentials than Letsema for the procurement elements due to a conflict of interest with Barlow World and Letsema. Just want to pause there, if I may. So, what was this conflict of interest involving Letsema?
Chairperson, as you say, these documents were received last night, but if I recall, The problem was that Barloworld was a potential bidder.
Sorry?
Barloworld was a potential bidder,
Right.
if I recall from where I sit now. And that Letsema was in partnership with Barloworld. And for Letsema to be advising on the bid evaluation, which is what I think this was about, there would be a conflict.
But why did that...
As far as I recall the incident, I think that is what happened.
All right. That did happen.
But if you read the memo, it should say what the problem was.
Well, that's the difficulty. I don't see that.
But what I recall was that
It refers to a potential conflict without, it seems, specifying the potential conflict.
what I recall was that Barloworld was a I don't, maybe, Chairperson, I'm making a mistake, but the conflict that I remember was that Barloworld was a potential bidder or a potential partner with one of the bidders.
Well, two questions, though. I mean, firstly, why was that not picked up during the tender evaluation process?
No, I don't know, Chair. You see,
And secondly, why is it not recorded in here?
Chair, I would have to go through these documents properly. As I say,
Yes.
they were handed out last night.
No, that's fair enough. Well, he might need time to have a look at it, Mr. Molefe.
It's not a very lengthy document, and of course I have no objection. The other option, of course, Mr. Molefe, is that you could have a look at this overnight. There might be other issues that arise, and then we could deal with it again tomorrow if you want.
Yes, yes. Please, I would like to go
Yeah.
through. I would like to go
No,
through
that's
and read. But sitting here, what I remember was that Barloworld would be a potential bidder, and so Letsema advising on the transaction advisory would have been a conflict.
No,
That's
I think it's fine. Go over it overnight, and then
Yes.
You can deal with it when you have had a chance to look at it.
All right. So, and perhaps then we could come back to the two questions, and that is, why wasn't it picked up during the
Yes.
tender evaluation, and why is it not recorded here? But let me take you to paragraph 15 at page 405.3. There you see, well, at 14 it talks about the tender evaluation process was concluded, whereby, and it talks about the McKinsey consortium, and then it says the Transnet Acquisition Council awarded the McKinsey consortium the complete advisory services and split the award regarding legal. That was the decision that was made, and we know that from the resolution of the Transnet Acquisition Council at pages 504.5 and 6.
Yes.
The financial implications, you see, McKinsey would get 35% of the value of the contract, and the procurement partner, Letsema, it says, replaced due to a conflict of interest, would get 20%, and the value of the contract, it appears at 17, is 50 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that is what the memo says.
So that's on the 22nd of August. What we do know, going forward in time, is that some 4 months or so later, on the 6th of December 2012, Transnet, in the form of Mr. Singh and McKinsey, conclude an LOI. Do you remember that? Letter of intent. It's not in the bundle. I'll take you there.
It's not in the bundle.
Not in yours. So let me just go through this. And Mr. Molefe, if there are documents that you want to see, then I'll take you to them. But then you must remember we have to wade through those files behind you. So let's just go through the chronology and see if you recall. So 22 August, we've got that letter.
22 August, which year?
22 August 2012. Okay.
2012.
Now I'm dealing with what happened. So in other words, there's a recommendation which you approve that Letsema can be replaced.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting to you is that on the 6th of December 2012, Transnet in the form of Mr. Singh and McKinsey conclude an LOI which reflects that regiments had replaced Letsema. And perhaps I should take you to that document given the importance of it, because this is how regiments comes on the scene.
On the 12th of December.
6th December.
6th of December.
Just give me a moment, please. Could you please go behind you to exhibit BB3, capital A?
Well, your junior, Mr. Mabe, could assist him to find the file.
Yes.
What we need is BB3B. So I think you have A, we need B.
I think please help him.
Yes.
Have you found it? Oh, you want the what? Have you got the page, Mr. Mabe?
BB3, B, page MSM 354. Are you there, Mr. Molefe? So there's two sets of numbering. I'm referring to the MSM number, top right hand, 354.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a letter of intent. It's dated the 30th of November 2012. You'll see the quality is very poor. But what we can make out, if you go to page 358, is that on the 4th of December it was signed by Mr. Singh. And if you go over the page,
338.
358.
358,
Yeah,
yes.
MSM 358. It was signed by Mr. Singh. MSM 359. It was then signed by McKinsey on the 6th of December.
Yes.
All right. Now, if you go to 354, you will see in the second paragraph it says the parties to this agreement are Transnet, and then we have McKinsey Incorporated, the supplier, the other members of the consortium, namely, and now you see Regiment's Capital. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so that's how, between the memo that you signed on the 22nd of August and now the 6th of December 2012, it's in that intervening period you see that regiments then replaced Letsema. Do you see that?
Yeah, but, Chairperson, as I always said at Transnet, before something like this happens, Mr. Singh enters into an agreement.
Please speak up, don't lower your voice.
Before something like this happens, Mr. Singh...
The replacement. When you say something like this, you mean the replacement?
A disagreement. Before an agreement like this gets signed,
Yeah.
there is usually a memo.
There is usually?
A memo
Yes.
that I have always said to Transnet executives, which must be written in English, that everybody understands. as to why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
That is recommended by somebody and then approved before we actually do the action. This is the action. So I would be curious to see if there was a memo.
Now, you see, Mr.
preceding
Molefe,
this.
Okay, let him finish, Mr. Mayback.
Now, I would be curious to see if there was a memo preceding this.
but you see, you perhaps misunderstand what happened. What you recommended is you said to McKinsey, you must replace Letsema. You
Yes.
said that to McKinsey. McKinsey did that.
Oh, I see.
It was McKinsey's choice. It's not a Transnet choice. So that memo that you're talking about is not what you see here.
But was there no memo?
This is McKinsey, and I'm going to come and explain to you how it happened.
Because even with that, I suspect there would have been something that says that, look, there was a memo before that says McKinsey must replace Letsema, and McKinsey has suggested that Letsema should be replaced with so-and-so, and therefore the
Yes.
contract is ready to be signed. We recommend that.
I'm
it be
going to
signed.
explain to you what happened now. It's one of the startling pieces of evidence that have been presented in this commission. So the question then is, between the 22nd of August and the 6th of December, how does regiments come to be appointed? And I want you to consider this. Have you come across and read the evidence of Mr. Ian Sinton of Standard Bank, given in this commission?
No, I just saw that Mr. Ian Sinton gave evidence, but I never looked at his affidavit or his...
All right, so according to what was reported to Mr. Sinton by Mr. Niven Pillay and another directors of regiments, their appointment came about in this way. Okay? In October of 2012, Kubin Mudli
This is what
arranged...
Mr. Sinton says.
Yes, it was reported to Mr. Sinton.
So this is what Mr. Sinton says Mr. Pillay told him.
Yeah, that's right. But just bearing in mind the context, Mr. Sinton is from Standard Bank, and he was investigating certain suspicious payments or
Yes.
transfers made out of regiment's account, and that's how he comes to give this evidence.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Molefe, I'm not, so that we don't cross swords, I'm not suggesting to you that every piece of evidence that I'm going to put to you is the gospel truth and that's what has to be found. I'm putting to you that that's his evidence.
Yes.
The chairperson will have to decide in time whether to accept it, but I'm just apprising you of what the evidence is
Yes.
as to how regiments comes on the scene.
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. Sinton says that it's reported to him by these two regiments directors
Yes.
that in October of 2012, Mr. Mudli arranges a meeting between himself, regiments, and Mr. Sagar of McKinsey and Mr. Esser. Okay? So we've got
Mr. Sinton?
no,
Moodley?
Sinton isn't there.
Oh, Moodley.
So what we have is two regiment directors.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Mudli arranges the meeting. Mr.
Yes.
Sagar is there from McKinsey, and Mr. Esser, who you know about but hadn't met, was there. He says that at this meeting, regiments were told that Transnet required McKinsey to appoint a black-owned supplier development partner for 30% of the fees earned, as we've seen.
Yes.
And McKinsey then offered to appoint regiments as its SD partner, provided regiments agreed to pay 30% of all of its income from Transnet to Mr. Esser and 5% to Mr. Mudli. That's how regiments came to be appointed.
Yes.
I presume you don't know anything about that.
Yes, I don't.
All right. Now, you might also have read from one of the money flow reports that we'll come to in a moment, that the money flows team doesn't necessarily consider Mr. Pillay to be a reliable witness and questions his version about whether Mr. Sagar was there, but considers it's possible that he's telling the truth. So the concern is not about Mr. Sinton, because it was reported to him. The question is whether Mr. Pillay was telling the truth. But what has been determined is that this is the manner in which regiments came onto the scene. And the understanding was that regiments would then replace Letsema, But with regiments on the scene, the deal was that they had to pay 30%, which in time was up to 50%, of all their earnings on that contract to Mr. Essa and 5% to Mr. Moodley. That was the evidence of Mr. Sinter.
So that was the arrangement between McKinsey and regiments.
Yes.
I can't comment.
No, you can't comment, presumably. All right. And then the rest is history. Because following Regiment's appointment as McKinsey's SD partner on the 1064 advisory contracts and other contracts, which we'll come to in a moment, more than 200 million rand was transferred from regiments to Gupta shell companies in payment of these fees. So
From regiments.
regiments would pay Gupta shell companies, for example, Homix, you would have read about them.
Yeah, I heard about Homix when the Gupta leaks first came out.
Yeah, so I suppose on the face of it, really, Mr. Essa pulled off something of a heist on that evidence. So for every rand, because it was up from 30%, every rand that was paid to regiments, they paid 50%, 50 cents in a rand to Mr. Essa for doing nothing, just because of this introduction.
Yeah, I can't comment.
So it's now that I want to take you to one of the money flow reports, if
Yes.
I may. Could I ask you please to turn to page...
Start with the bundle, same bundle.
Bundle 5, Chairperson. Perhaps we need just to start with page 115. Are you at 115, Mr. Molefe?
Is that where we have a 3-3 notice?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a 3-3 notice that was issued to you. You see it's dated the 18th of November last year, 2020.
Yeah.
And you were advised, and this was issued in the run-up to McKinsey giving evidence. You were issued with this notice, and you were told at paragraph 4, the topics on which witnesses from McKinsey will be questioned and may implicate you are the following, and they listed, and you referred there to annexures A and B. Do you see that?
Come again? Annexures A and B.
Yeah, paragraph 4 references annexure B, A and annexure B. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
And those are what we refer to as the two money flow reports. The one report you find at page 120, and I'm not going to go to this now, I'm coming to it. What I want to take you to, though, is the second money flow report, which would have been annexure B, and that you find at page 324. Are you there? 324. I think that's it there.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you at 324? So what this is, Mr. Molefe, is a report that was drafted by the Money Flows team, an investigator by the name of Lisa Muller, and it was a report that was part of the documents, formal exhibit before the Commission at the hearing of the McKinsey evidence. I want to take you, please, to page 325. Are you there?
Yeah, is this report was done by?
This is a report done by, so there are various different streams within the commission.
Yeah, it was done by the commission.
This is done by the money flows team, yes.
Team.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, this is what I was referring to about findings.
Yes, well,
This is one of them that has findings.
I
At
think,
the beginning when I
Yes,
said
no, I remember you raising that.
some of the reports have got findings.
well, I think
Yes.
you can accept that it's a report by the money flows team. It might make certain factual findings,
Let's just say preliminary.
but it's certainly not, it's not a finding that the commissioner has made. It's
Yes,
simply a-
maybe I need to explain that, Mr. Molefe, because it could be confusing to somebody not maybe used to commissions. I am the only person who would make findings that you should be concerned about.
Yes.
But when investigators investigate, investigators of the commission, they may form some views as to what the position is.
Yeah.
And maybe they could even, or some witnesses could put that as their conclusions or their findings, but it's not my findings. The ones that you should be concerned about are those that are made by me.
Yes.
The ones that they may make or conclusions that they make are just opinions and so on, and they can...
No, I was just saying it so that there is a distinction.
No, I accept that you were...
Maybe they should use other terminology.
Yes,
like
no.
preliminary or
No, I understand.
conclusions. Or,
Yes.
but when they say findings, it's
Yes,
like,
no, I understand.
because they work for the commission.
Yes,
Yes.
no, I understand, yeah.
So, Mr. Molefe, perhaps I can also explain to you that these reports were put before McKinsey. They were prepared in advance of McKinsey's evidence.
Yes.
And McKinsey accepted them, because we'll come to the settlement with McKinsey in a moment. But there are just
Yes.
some aspects of this money flow report that I want to take you to, and perhaps we can go through it in some detail. At paragraph 1, they refer to their previous report, which they say shows that ESSA orchestrated the incorporation of regiments as McKinsey's supply development partner. I've explained that to you already.
Yes.
And then Mr. Nevin Pillay and another person of regiments have repeatedly testified at paragraph 2 in civil litigation that the original arrangement reached between regiments and ESSA, this is at page 325, in this regard was that an entity nominated by ESSA would receive 30% of all amounts
I'm
received.
sorry, Mr. Maibek. I thought you were 323. Are you now at 325?
I beg your pardon, I am at 325.
Oh, okay.
At paragraph 2.
Okay, no, sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me today.
Well, I'm sure it's probably my fault, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry if I've led
I
you
think it's the
astray.
second time I'm focusing on red page numbers.
Well, I would have thought if anyone has learned by now, it must be you.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's fine, yeah. Yeah, 325.
325. So, at paragraph 2, they record that these two people have repeatedly testified
Yes.
that an entity nominated by ESSA would receive 30% of all amounts received by regiments, flowing from its position as McKinsey's supply development partner at Transnet, and an additional 5% would be paid to Albertine, a company of Gubun Mudli, who introduced regiments to ESSA. I've explained that to you. It's not clear whether this 30-5% arrangement was ever implemented. The cash flows analysed by the Commission show that the arrangement actually implemented by regiments for most of the lifespan of the relationship with McKinsey was that ESSA's entities were ordinarily paid 50% of regiments' revenue from Transnet, with Albertine being paid 5% of Transnet's revenue, leaving regiments with only 45%. And then they say at paragraph 3...
Just hang on 1 second. I think that sentence on page 326, starting with the cash flows analyzed by the Commission, might be a good example of what Mr. Molefe was talking
Yes.
about. Instead of saying analyzed by the commission, it might be analyzed by the money flows team.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right.
Then it says at paragraph 3, in some cases, regiments laundering arrangements with ESSA and Albertine on joint McKinsey stroke regiments contracts with Transnet were fraudulently presented by regiments in joint McKinsey stroke regiment bid submissions as regiment supply development arrangements. In other cases, the laundering payments were made without any pretext of such payments in the proposal submitted by McKinsey stroke regiments. Paragraph 4, although through these laundry arrangements, hundreds of millions of rands were laundered through shell companies nominated by ESSA out of fees paid by Transnet to regiments on the McKinsey stroke regiments appointments at Transnet. You see that?
Yes.
Then they say at paragraph 5, the report says, regiments has publicly admitted that it had an arrangement with ESSA and Moodley that they pay ESSA and Albertine 50% and 5% respectively of the income they receive from Transnet in respective contracts on which they worked alongside McKinsey. They claim that these payments were business development fees due to ESSA, who introduced them to McKinsey, and to Moodley, who introduced them to ESSA. Paragraph 6, the business development fees paid to ESSA were simply money laundering payments. The shell companies designated by ESSA to receive these business development fees changed over time. They included Javita, which we'll hear about later, and Homex, a number of others. Over the page, all of these shell companies operated as out-and-out money laundering vehicles without any legitimate business activities. Revenue received from regiments by these shell companies was within days, laundered to lower-level money laundering entities. Apart from inflows from regiments and other corrupt associates of ESSA and the Guptas, the shell companies had no income. Apart from outflows to lower-level laundry entities, the shell companies had no expenses of consequence. None of the shell companies paid PAYE, in brackets, employees' tax, to SARS. You see that?
Yes.
Now we get to a part that involves you directly, at paragraph 6. The joint McKinsey stroke regiment's proposal in June 2014 for the coal line contract, because you signed these contracts together with Mr. Singh, we're going to come to them in a moment, or you signed the confinements. The joint McKinsey stroke regiment's proposal in June 2014 for the coal line contract, the NMPP contract, stated that regiments would be using Homex and Albertine as supply development partners.
The contract stated that Homex will be used.
Yeah, that's how bad it was. I'll show you the contract.
Yes.
So now Homex is actually put up as a supply development partner of regiments. At paragraph 9, the coal line and NMPP contracts were awarded to McKinsey and regiments without any competitive bidding process. I'll come to the detail in a moment. At the same time, Transnet also awarded to McKinsey and regiments without any competitive bidding process contracts for the Kumba iron ore and manganese contracts. Those are contracts that you, or bids, confinements that you and Mr. Singh signed. I'll come to them in a moment. 10. In the context of preparing joint proposals for these contracts, regiments emailed to McKinsey on 13 June 2014 a spreadsheet containing a detailed breakdown of fees that were to be paid by regiments to Homex and Albertine in their guise as supply development partners of regiments on the 4 contracts. The spreadsheets attached to the regiment's email of 13 June 2014 provided for aggregate amounts in excess of 100 million rand to be paid to Homex and Albertine on the 4 contracts. Paragraph 11. McKinsey has confirmed through David Fine's statement, he works for McKinsey, to Parliament that neither Homex nor Albertine were involved in providing services in any project in which McKinsey were involved. However, as detailed below, millions of rands were paid to Homex and Albertine from the amounts paid by Transnet to regiments in respect of these 4 contracts and other regiment/McKinsey contracts.
So the money went from Transnet to regiments to these companies?
Yeah.
Or was it from Transnet to McKinsey to regiments?
Well, sometimes they were paid directly where they were the skills development partner. We'll come to the detail.
Yeah.
So in some
these companies
instances,
came with regiments?
in some instances, what would happen is it would be McKinsey and regiments, right? And then the deal was Transnet would pay regiments, and then those amounts would be dispersed to ESSA and Albertine through Homex, etc. In other instances, what happened is when McKinsey/regiments put in a bid, regiments put up Homex and Albertine as their skills development partners.
And then, but they would pay
That's
their
right.
skills development partners after being paid by Transnet.
Okay, so then have a look at paragraph 12. So it talks about, in February 2016, regiments produced an internal evaluation of its advisory unit for the purpose of determining what payments should be made between Wood and Pillay, etc. And it says that
That name there, Mr. Mapek, is Nyonya.
Nyonya,
Yeah, no, just so that,
between Wood, Pillay and Nyonya,
yes.
when Wood, with a 32% interest in regiments, took the advisory unit with him to Trillion, but gave up his interest of all other business units within regiments.
If I'm pronouncing it wrongly, somebody should let us know, but that's my understanding of how it is pronounced.
Yes.
I'm indebted to you, Mr. Chairperson.
Okay.
Then there are 2 other paragraphs which I'm going to deal with Mr. Singh in particular. We can leave those out for the moment. But let's just go to the conclusions at paragraph 3. Over the period March 2014 to February 16, regiments paid hundreds of millions of rands to money laundering vehicles designated by ESSA in return for his role in corruptly procuring their procurement to contracts with state-owned enterprises. 16, more than 200 million of these laundry payments derived from fees paid to regiments on contracts that where they worked as McKinsey's supply development partner at Transnet. 17, in some of its joint proposals with McKinsey, regiments fraudulently provided for these laundry payments by describing ESSA's laundry vehicle, Homex, as regiment's supply development partner. So, do you get the picture generally, Mr. Molefe?
Yes.
Now, did you know about this?
No, Chair.
All right. So, at least on this report,
You're asking whether he knew then, Mr. Mapek?
yes, then,
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Molefe. So, I mean, on the face of this report, what happened is that whilst you were at the helm of Transnet, there was large-scale money laundering happening under your watch using Transnet. You see that?
This money laundering, I mean, it's not a finding, is it?
Sorry?
It's not a finding.
No, fair enough.
It's not a finding. So,
Well, I'm saying that the chairperson,
so the chairperson must still apply
he must
his
still
mind
decide.
to this evidence
That's why I specifically said to you on the face of this report.
on
I
the
accept
face.
it. I mean,
Yes, so what Mr. Mapek is doing, Mr. Molefe, is he is saying, as far as he's concerned, when he looks at this report,
Yes.
it would seem that it suggests that during the relevant time, and during that relevant time you were Group CEO of Transnet, there was large-scale money laundering.
Yes.
But he wants you in the end to say whether you have any comments. And so I just want to put that in context, his
Yes.
proposition in context, yeah.
I agree with your choice of words, Chair.
Yes,
It would
yes.
seem so.
Yeah,
And so I will wait for the finding,
Yeah.
final finding to be made as to
Yeah.
whether there was money laundering, there was corruption, as he says, and so on and so forth. Then I will express my opinion
Yeah.
at that point. But the commission is still ongoing. This is part of an investigation that is ongoing. So
Yeah.
let's wait and see what happens what comes out of the wash.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure you'll appreciate that the Commission isn't able to make separate findings. In other words, it couldn't sign off on this and make a finding of money laundering and then we cross-examine you. Unfortunately, or examine you, these processes need to run together.
Yes.
But I'm simply putting to you certainly it seems to me, the money laundering stream is going to advance to the chairperson.
It
All
seems that is what is going to happen. So
Okay.
I will wait for the findings to be made and then we can take it from there.
What
Do I understand
But
your-
what is
Do I
what I
understand?
can categorically say now is I had no knowledge of these schemes
Yes,
and had no part in them,
yeah.
and that from where I was sitting, there was certainly no wrongdoing on my part.
Am I correct in understanding you to be saying you have no quarrel with the suggestion that if what the report says is what happened, then it seems that there was large-scale money laundering?
It seems so.
It seems so,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's good enough, yeah.
Before one jumps, we must wait for the drum to beat first. The drum
Yeah.
will beat when the findings are made.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Before we start dancing.
You see, the idea is this, that when Mr. Mayberg reads this report, that is what seems to him.
Yes.
But you might read this report and say, but I don't agree that if this is what happened, it means there was large-scale laundering. Or you might even say, no, it doesn't reflect any
Or
money
I might
laundering.
even say-
So the idea is just to give your own perspective.
Or I might even say, well, it will be interesting to hear what these people have to say about this.
Yes, yeah.
Their right of reply.
Yes.
And because when they do reply, a different
Yes.
picture might emerge.
Yeah.
So I would rather hold the horses
Yeah.
and say, I note what is being said. We'll wait for the final outcome.
Yeah.
However, I want to emphasize that in as far as my knowledge, personal knowledge of these activities are concerned, I did not know about them, and I was not involved, and I deny any wrongdoing if that is what is being
Yes, that I
suggested.
appreciate. But I suppose now you understand the context in which we have concerns about what the drivers have to say, about senior executives having money.
What the drivers have to say.
Yeah,
What did the drivers say, Mr. Biber?
we'll come to that. But
Yes.
you do understand, just so that before we move on, that on
Yeah,
just hang on, Mr. Molefe, on the face of this report, Mr. Essa and the Guptas are engaged in money laundering
The
in
Guptas,
hundreds of millions. You understand that?
it seems so.
Yes, I'm saying on the face of this
I
report.
understand what you say.
Now,
And also understand that you're saying it seems so.
you saying it seems so. I'm saying on the face of the report.
The chairperson said.
Yes,
it
but I
seems
want to
so.
make
And
one point
All I
to-
said was I like the chairperson's choice of words.
But I want
Because
to,
we must still wait for the final finding.
but you talked about a beating of the drum. This is not silent, because the one thing I want to mention to you is that McKinsey, have conceded that all of these contracts were tainted.
Yes.
And they've put their money where their mouth is. They've agreed to pay back 650 million in relation to these contracts and a contract at SAA.
Yes.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yes. But let's wait for the final findings.
Well,
And in any case,
Yes.
you may well present this to me, but it is up to the chairperson
Yes, I understand
to
that.
make a finding.
Do you want to comment on McKinsey having accepted that all the contracts are tainted where they worked alongside regiments and on the basis have agreed to pay 650 million.
No, I will not comment on it.
But you accept they did that?
Yeah, they did that.
I mean, you heard that.
They did it of their own volition, for their own reasons. I do not see why.
Well, they did it because the contracts are tainted. They wouldn't have done it out of the goodness of their heart.
Maybe they did it out of the goodness of their heart.
Mr. Molefe, please.
Yes, Mr. Mybeck, Mr. McKenzie,
All right.
McKenzie took a particular line of action. And all I'm saying is, I don't see a need for me to comment.
So you see now the importance of every time we determine the involvement of Mr. Essa, it becomes important, doesn't it?
To you.
And to the Commission.
And to the Commission, yes.
All right. I just wanted to go back and ask you this. What I struggle, and the great irony, I suppose, insofar as you say you're completely innocent, is this started with you agreeing to Letsema being replaced.
Yes.
Yes. Now, I just
Yes.
want- Mr. Molefe?
Yeah, isn't it the famous case of the guy who slept in the bathroom, had a concussion?
Please raise your voice. Speak up, Mr. Molefe.
I say, isn't it the case of the guy who slept in the bathroom, had a concussion, and then somebody rushed him to hospital, and then on the way to hospital, they had a car accident, and then when they got to...
I can't hear you.
I don't think the chairperson
I
can
can't
hear you.
hear you.
And you know you must speak to him.
I'm saying to Mr. Mybeck, isn't this the case of the guy who slept in his bathroom, had a concussion, was rushed to hospital? On the way to hospital, he had a car accident, and then when he got to hospital, he was not attended to, and he died. So now...
I don't know what you're talking about.
All right.
And maybe let's continue.
Yeah, and then he died, and then what Mr. Mybeck is saying, but the problem is the concussion.
If at a later stage you think there is something important about this incident, this example, you can come back to it, but let's continue for now.
But I
Can
know
we
that
maybe
Mr.
leave the
Mybeck,
crocodiles out of this
Mr. Mybeck understands what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I do, and I mean, but I need to put to you that it started with the decision that you made.
Is it somehow like the man who walks next to the goats?
Yeah, I think it is. Too close to the goat.
Too
maybe.
close to the goats. But
Mr.
it's not
Molefe,
stealing them.
I think what's important, and again, I'm being, in fairness to you, I suppose whether you walked too close to the goats or whether you were complicit can't be determined on a decision-by-decision basis. So you can't say, well, Letsema, something about a crocodile and I didn't do anything wrong. What we're going to have to do at the end of your evidence is tally all of these things up and then ask the question, did you really not know? Were they too smart for you? Were you asleep at the wheel? Or were you complicit?
Yes.
And we have to decide that on all of the facts.
I have no problem
All right.
in you deciding that, as long as it is based on evidence.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. So could I just take you, perhaps for the sake of completion, to page 403 of the same bundle, bundle 5. There is a media statement released by the chairperson. You've read this, I take it. 403.
Yes.
Have you read this statement before?
Yes.
Perhaps paragraph 1 captures it. McKinsey worked alongside Regiment's Capital at Transnet and SAA on contracts that have been investigated by the Commission. The Commission recently initiated discussions with McKinsey and is now pleased to announce that McKinsey has undertaken to repay all of the fees paid to it for work it performed on the Transnet and SAA contracts alongside Regiment. The amount covered by McKinsey's undertaking has not yet been fixed with Transnet and SAA, but is likely to be around 650 million. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
I just want to go back before we go forward. Did you, when Transnet agreed that Letsema be replaced by regiments, I mean, that was a big change, not so? Letsema to regiments. Because if you look at it in the context of the contract, they were effectively a 30% partner. It's a big change to move from one SD partner to another, not so?
No, the change that in which I was involved
Yes.
was to say that regiments must find
Yeah.
another partner.
But it's a big change.
No, that wasn't the big change.
No, it was because...
The big change for me, after everything that was said, is when the deals that you talk about were made.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was the big
Yeah,
change.
but I mean, because
But
you
just
must be
saying-
about the money, I know.
Yeah, but just saying that regiments must replace Letsema and just leaving it there,
But Mr.
I
Molefe,
think was not a big change.
no? Okay, well, perhaps
So
Perhaps
it
I
was,
need to refine
it
my
was
question.
on the actual, not even the replacement that happened, but the deals that you now describe
Yeah.
happened down the line where actually the big change happened.
yes, no, I think perhaps we had cross purposes. The replacement of Letsema with regiments was a material change to the McKinsey consortium.
Yes, but you must remember that my involvement was where not even the replacement, it was to say that Letsema needs to be replaced
But,
because of a conflict of interest.
but when
And
that was...
it's unfortunate that here, that conflict is not properly captured because, as I remember, it was because Barloworld is likely to be a bidder.
Because...
But I will go and investigate this overnight about why Letsema was, there was a recommendation that I agreed with, that Letsema must be replaced. But the big change for me in listening to this story is when the deals that you're talking about sharing of the funds and so on, are concerned. That is where the big
But you didn't
change-
know about that.
I didn't know about that.
Because you and I had cross purposes on this, I'm afraid. Can I just take you, see if we can cut through this for the purposes of moving on? Can I ask you to go, I think for the first time, to bundle 6, to exhibit 27?
Yes. Page?
Are you there? I want to take you towards the end of the file to page 380. 380.
It was up to 318.
I think you might have the wrong file. This is one of the two, Mr. Molefe, that I gave you this morning.
It's a file that should be in front of you, one of the files in front of you. It should say Transnet Bundle 505, 06, I'm sorry. Transnet Bundle 06. It's a smaller file, I think. Transnet Bundle 06. What about the green one, that green one that you have in front of you?
Green one
there?
is mine.
Oh. It looks like, oh, I thought they were finding it somewhere else. Transnet Bundle 06.
With your leave, Mr. Chairman, we'll find that file because I know that I gave it to Mr. Molefe this morning.
Yes,
But there are a
yes.
lot of files.
Oh,
My junior has another copy of this
Yes.
bundle, perhaps for the sake of
Okay,
speeding
yeah.
things up.
Mr. Molefe, they'll give you another file.
Oh, the eminence report.
All right, so are you at page 380?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the fact that
Do you want to give Mr. Molefe a sanitizer? Have you got a sanitizer there?
I have a
They'll
share.
give it to you. Will you be fine? Okay, all right.
Thank you. As long as it's a sanitizer, not something. All right. So, Mr. Molefe, are you familiar with these reports
Yes.
in this bundle? This page 380, you see at paragraph 2.4, there's the heading Letter of Intent, 6 December. We've spoken about that. I want to take you, if I may, to paragraph 2.4.5. And Mr. Molefe, you will also, in fairness to you, I point out that these reports, of course, are not binding on the chairperson. They're just opinions of
Yes.
the particular entity. But I take you to it so that I can get you to comment on the propositions that I want to make. It says at 245, pursuant to the approval by Mr. Molefe that McKinsey partner with another service provider, Regiments was included as a member of the McKinsey consortium, despite not having properly tendered as part of the McKinsey consortium. 2.4.6, the appearance of Regiment's name as a member of the McKinsey consortium and accordingly a service provider to Transnet at this stage of the procurement process was irregular for the following reasons. Sub 1. Regiments was not a member of the McKinsey consortium when it submitted its proposal for the 1064 transaction advisor tender. Sub 2. The 1064 transaction advisor tender was awarded by the TAC to the McKinsey consortium based on its stated composition at the time of the submission of its proposal. The capabilities of the McKinsey consortium members to perform the various aspects of the 1064 transaction advisory tender, and accordingly the McKinsey consortium's eligibility for the award was assessed based on the verification and evaluation of the claims made by its constituent members, of which Regiments was not one. And sub 3, Transnet has a statutory duty to ensure that when it contracts for goods and services, it does so in accordance with a system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. To this end, Transnet has in place a PPM which states inter alia that all procurement with Transnet shall be done in line with these procedures. The inclusion of Regiments as a member of the consortium was not transparent, competitive, and ultimately not in accordance with any of the PPM stipulated procurement paths.
Yes.
Sub 7. It is apparent from the inclusion of Regiments as a member of the McKinsey consortium in the LOI that after the adjudication and award of the tender by Transnet, the McKinsey consortium was permitted to change its composition and to introduce a new member, viz. Regiments. As such, the capabilities and other credentials of Regiments were not subjected to the rigor of the verification, evaluation, and adjudication process inherent in any tender process. Now, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. Chairperson, as you see in 2.4.5, it says, pursuant to the approval by Mr. B. Molefe that McKinsey partner with another service provider. That is where I was involved.
Yes.
They should partner with another service
Yes.
provider. Then after that, what you presented was an agreement between McKinsey and Transnet, signed by Mr. Singh, that that partner would be Regiment, right? And then I asked, when that contract was presented here, that this contract must have been preceded by a memo. I
No.
did ask at the time. I don't know if you remember. I said, the way that we did things, for Mr. Singh to sign a contract like this, there must have been a memo that explains the background to the this decision to sign this contract.
Mr. Molefe.
And at the time, I said, I would be interested to see that memo, what that memo says about regiments and what really the reasons behind the decisions are. And then I think you said, no, we don't have the memo, we just have the agreement.
No, why laugh? No one is going to record what happened. I've told you what happened. It's large-scale criminal activity.
No.
A meeting was called and regiments were told, we will appoint you, but then you must pay ESSA 30% of the
Yes,
fees.
but-
That's not going to find its way into a memorandum.
But at Transnet,
Yes.
for Mr. Singh to sign a contract like that, there must have been a memo.
Well, let's see what Mr. Singh says, but let me ask you this question. Where was regiments subjected to verification, evaluation, and adjudication?
But that memo would say,
No, that's not what happened. What the facts show is you decided that Letsema should be replaced. It opened the door for McKinsey to choose whoever they wanted. That was your
Yes.
decision.
Yes.
Why did you not say that whoever you choose as a replacement for Letsema has to be subjected to the same verification, evaluation, and adjudication process? Why didn't you do
That's
that?
why I'm curious to see if Mr. Singh's signing of that contract was preceded by a memo written in what I always call that Transnet English
Yeah.
that explains why we are taking a decision.
Why did you not provide, when you took the decision, that regiments had to be subject to the same verification, evaluation, and adjudication process as Letsema? Why did you not provide for that in your decision?
You mean, why was that not recommended to me?
You also had to apply your mind. Mr.
No,
Molefe,
I was not saying who should replace Letsema. I was not involved.
That's
in that.
not what I'm
asking.
The letter with me ends where Letsema is just, must be replaced.
Let's look at it from this angle. Do you accept, as you sit there today, or do you not accept that it would have been irregular for regiments to be brought in
Yes.
in that fashion without being subjected to that process of verification? Do you accept that?
I do, Chair.
Yes.
Which
Okay,
is
all right.
why I'm asking
Yes.
Mr. Anoj Singh's signature of that contract. Was it preceded by a memo? Because that memo would have outlined the process that was followed or not followed. It is actually in assessing the contents of that memo, if it exists, that would tell us exactly what happened and what the reasons were. Yes.
But-
And unfortunately, because I did not sign that contract, I did not see that memo. But what I'm saying to the commission is, if you really, really want to get to the bottom of how regiments got to be, or Mr. Singh got to sign that agreement, there must have been a memo. Unless Mr. Singh comes here and says, no, I signed, but there was no memo.
Yes, okay. But as you sit there, looking at this and accepting that it would have been irregular for regiments to be included without going through this verification process,
Yes.
are you leaving out what might be found if there is a memo? And Mr. Mybeck has already said that I think it's unlikely there would be any memo. Leaving that aside, can you think of any reason why it would have been justifiable to include regiments without subjecting regiments to that process that Letsema had been subjected to?
Yeah, no, I can't think of it.
Chairperson,
I can't think of
Chair.
Yes.
I would imagine this is one of the documents that were received last night. And if that is the position, I think Mr. Molefe should be granted an opportunity.
Your voice is lowered.
I was saying, Chair, this is one of the documents that has been received. last night, and if that is the case, Mr. Molefe can be given an opportunity to look at it overnight.
To get,
Mr. Molefe can be given an opportunity to look at this document overnight, if this is one of the documents that were received last night, especially those documents that relate to Lejima and others.
yes,
The contract, what I would do tonight is to write to the commission and say,
Yeah.
can you please investigate if Mr. Anoch Singh's entering into a contract was preceded by a memo. Please ask Transnet if there was a memo and get hold of that memo. Failing which, perhaps Mr. Anoch Singh can explain what the process was.
yeah.
But to be fair, I'm not in a position to comment on that because I also want to understand what the process was.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Mr. Madak?
Yes, thank you. So you see, on the
And
face...
Mr. Singh is coming, of course.
Yes, Mr. Singh is coming. He will no doubt deal with the questions that you've left for him and that I've got for him too. But Mr. Molefe, you see, what the facts show is that regiments actually became involved without any adjudication or evaluation or verification of them. Certainly not by Transnet. So just so that you understand.
Unless if we find a memo that explains
No,
that.
but Mr. Molefe, it doesn't help you to say unless you can find a memo. The Commission has investigated this matter. This is evidence that has been dealt with. I'm taking you to the M&S report. They also investigated matters. You can't every time one's faced with a difficult question say, but there must be a memo somewhere. I mean, just so that you understand, on the face of it. So
The problem with your difficult questions, Mr. Maibek, is that there are questions that did not involve anything that I did.
All right, do you know
Because
how...
I can explain my actions.
No, but you were involved here directly, you see.
No, I said I was involved up to the point where Letsema had to be replaced. I was not involved in the replacement of Letsema.
But you
And
don't-
all I'm saying is, in the replacement of Letsema, was there a memo that was written?
No, there wasn't. Not on our investigation and research.
Was there? Definitely not. I mean, was there,
I can't-
was Transnet asked for that memo?
Mr. Molefe, if there was one, then we would have put it up. I mean, I can't swear
no.
that there isn't one. But the point is, if you could just deal with this, why did you not apply your mind and say, we can't let McKinsey just replace Letsema with whoever they want? Why did you-
Arrangements.
I beg your pardon.
You.
Why did you not provide for some evaluation process? That's really all I'm asking you. In your decision, in the decision that you took.
Yeah, Chair, that I'm prepared to concede.
Right.
That
Yes.
maybe when we said Letsema must be replaced, we should have also talked about a process
Yeah.
to find the replacement.
Yes.
We did not talk about the process. However, I'm curious to see, even in the absence of stating that there must be a process, what was followed? What was the process?
Would it be correct to say you are keen to find this out because on your own understanding,
Yes.
it would have been irregular for regiments to be included without going through the process. So you are keen to find out what justification may have been put up.
It would have been odd, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Maibach?
Thank you. So let's then move on. So that was the conflict that arose. Letsema, we know, is ultimately replaced by regiments. And that happens between August and December, that's 2012. Now, do you remember that a year later, in about November 2013, regiments then replaced Nedbank due to another conflict of interest?
I seem to recall that vaguely.
November 2013.
Yeah, I recall.
All Right?
Let me just say I remember.
Okay, well, perhaps tomorrow I will give you a copy of the letter because I have it in Mr. Singh's file. But for the moment...
Mr. Singh signed the letter.
Yes, he does. So, do you recall regiments replacing Nedbank?
Vaguely, Chair. I have no recollection of the detail.
Right?
But, once again, there would have been a memo. And I'm quite happy to look at the memo and look, because that is what the discipline that we had instilled was that every action must be accompanied by a memo that explains in English exactly what is happening.
Well, perhaps Mr. Singh wasn't as rigorous in the memo process as you were. He signs the letter. But let me give you a copy tomorrow, in fairness.
Of the letter?
Yeah.
And the memo that precedes the letter, if there is.
Now,
must I take volume 6, bundle 6 away, or you still need it?
I think you, yes, I think you could. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay. See, I have limited space here, so I have to keep an eye on how many files I keep here.
Oh, sorry, I put
Okay.
this file so safely here on the chair that I couldn't find it.
Mr. Molefe?
No, that file that was missing.
You have found
it's
it?
here on my chair, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I had put it away to be closed, but now I forgot.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Molefe, look, I'm going to give you this letter and obviously the Chairperson the letter. I'll prepare it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Maibek, maybe now that you have discovered that you have got it there, maybe the one that was lent to you should go so that you
Yes.
don't end up,
Yes.
yeah, it should be returned
Can we have
to
that back?
whence it came from.
Mr. Molefe, just so that we locate ourselves, I'll give you the letter overnight, but dated the 19th of November 2013, signed by Mr. Singh, paragraph 3. In May 2013, a potential conflict of interest was raised with McKinsey.
Do I have that?
No, you don't.
I don't, okay.
I'm going to provide it overnight.
What was the date of the letter?
19 November 2013. Okay. In May 2013, a potential conflict of interest was raised with McKinsey concerning Nedbank, to which a response from McKinsey confirmed the conflict and an alternative solution to provide the services to Transnet was proposed in terms of regiment's capital to provide the services. Paragraph 6, this letter, says Mr. Singh, serves to confirm Transnet's agreement to McKinsey's request that regiment's capital to provide the required services in place of Nedbank. So you see what's happened there.
Yeah, but I can confirm that was not discussed with me.
Sorry?
I can confirm that was not discussed with me.
Yes, because another big and important change, and you see how regiments now becomes more dominant, not so?
Yes.
Yes. And of course, as it became more dominant, it charged more fees, and the money laundering grew. That's what you see from the money flows report, at least, not so?
I can't comment on
But
that.
do you see what was happening here?
Eh?
Do you see what was happening here?
But I can't comment on it because, as I say, I was not involved in it.
But you understand now that one's got to track regiments. One must track carefully the decisions that were taken that enabled regiments to come on the scene. One must track carefully every extension of the scope of regiments' work. Isn't that so?
Yeah, but
You accept that?
Mr. Maibek, I say to you that the way that I understood the system to work was that every single decision had to be carefully explained in a memo.
Yeah.
Now, in the absence of these memos,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what the memos will say when we find them.
Here's Mr. Singh's letter, Mr. Molefe.
No. The letter, before you write a letter and make a decision like that or become involved in a decision, there has to be a memo. That is how we operated. And in the absence of a memo, I would really want to know why was this decision not properly explained?
That's exactly the question that we're asking.
In English.
Yes, precisely. But what you've said now, which is important, is that you knew nothing about this. Correct?
Yes.
All right.
But
I
I would also be curious to see if that decision was properly documented.
And what you also accept, I suppose, is every single contract which is concluded with regiments must also come under the microscope, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And what we're going to see is, do you remember how many contracts you signed or tender confinements you signed in favor of regiments? Many.
No, I don't remember.
We're going to come to them.
Yes.
And in fact,
And when you do,
yes,
bring them with their memos.
they're here in these bundles, the
Yes,
documents that
yes.
they are.
Okay, no, that's fine.
And maybe unwittingly, but you've seen from the money flows reports
Yes.
that those contracts generated massive money laundering payments. The contracts that you signed. Do you understand how one has to look at this carefully now under the microscope? Mr. Molefe, you understand that?
Yes, I do.
And one's really only able to draw conclusions at the end, correct?
No.
Okay. So let us then, just before I move on, you did know, as I understand your evidence, that regiments, having replaced Letsema, also went on to replace Nedbank. You knew that happened. But as I understand it, you didn't have anything to do with the decision.
Yeah, I can't recall the detail or I remember that vaguely. Yeah, but I can't recall the detail.
Can you think why Mr. Singh wouldn't have engaged you over this decision? Because he certainly engaged you over the decision to replace, to have Letsema replaced.
Which is why I want to see the memo.
But you see, it's a phantom defense.
No. It was, I don't know, 2013 is 8 years ago. A lot of things have happened in 8 years. So I do remember this vaguely, but I need my memory to be jogged.
All right.
Especially that some of the documents arrived last night. I really need to apply my mind and try to recall properly what happened.
Okay. All right, so now we've got to November 2013. I'm just following the chronology, tracking this 1064 advisory contract. There then came a time, you may recall, where McKinsey ceded its rights and obligations to regiments. Do you remember? On the 1064 contract. So just look at the steps. Letsema is replaced by regiments. Regiments then replace Nedbank. McKinsey then cedes the contract to regiments. Regiments now becomes the primary contractor, correct?
Yes, yes.
In circumstances where there's been absolutely no verification, evaluation, or assessment of it.
Where are the documents?
And
We
without
want-
having won any tender.
Come again, Chair?
And without having won any tender.
Without having won any tender, yes. But where are the documents?
I'm going to tell you, well, that's one of the new documents I got last night, so I just want to place that on record. But let's go to that document.
So it's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Myberg. So it's like Mr. Molefe, regiments comes in and says, no, I'll just take a hand. Then after some time it says, I want the whole arm. And then later on it says, no, I'm taking over everything. When then McKinsey...
Were they taking
consents
over
to
or were
it.
they being given? Were they taking over or were they being given?
I don't know if there's a difference, but ultimately they take the position of the main contractor,
Yes.
when in fact they were not even there at the beginning.
Yes.
Slowly they come in, then they want more. Then ultimately, maybe somebody might say they push McKinsey out and take over, but maybe it's not pushing out, but they take over in the end.
Yes.
Mr. Mybeck?
Yes, thank you. Could I ask you, please, to go to exhibit BB3 little a? And if you could then turn to page, the numbers at the top, the MSM numbers, MSM 175. Are you there?
Yes.
So this is a letter by Mr. Sagar from McKinsey to Mr. Singh, dated the 16th of April. And it reads, pursuant to our discussion and agreement on 5 February, we hereby confirm that the mandate awarded to McKinsey Incorporated all rights and obligations created thereby was, on 5 February, ceded and delegated to Regiment's capital.
Yes.
You see that?
Yes.
You see how it grew.
Yeah, but could this be done legally?
We're going to come to that because this is where you become directly involved. So I'm not suggesting necessarily that this is illegal, but what we know is that regiments were conducting themselves illegally. They were siphoning funds from your business.
Yeah,
do
but
you
here
understand
is-
what happened here, Mr. Molefe?
No, McKinsey
Yes.
is ceding its rights to a contract.
And I'm going to put parts of McKinsey's evidence to you. You see, this was around the time where the contract, the 1064 contract, was coming to fruition. And McKinsey, in fact, walked away from this. And they were replaced by regiments. And in this time, they then came back subsequently.
So
But just bear with me.
they were coerced into doing this.
Just bear with me for a moment. It was in this time between McKinsey leaving and when they came back that there was this massive increase in the ETC for the 1064 locomotives.
What increase?
Sorry?
What
The
increase?
ETC.
The ETC.
You've-
Let's come
have
to
you
that.
forgotten the abbreviation, what it stands for?
The estimated total cost.
Yeah, that was not an increase, but we'll get to it.
All right. So just tracking this. So here we see 16 April, McKinsey are saying, look, I've ceded rights and obligations. They're out in relation to the 1064 advisory contract. You follow? Regiments is now the dominant entity, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's then have a look at your contract. Now go please back to your file, bundle 5, page 405.7. This is also a letter that you received, or a memo that you received recently. You're more than welcome to take time to look at it more carefully.
So this is what we got yesterday.
Yeah, 405.7.
What? Yes.
Now this, incidentally, remember the McKinsey letter is dated the 16th of April. This is a memorandum to you from Mr. Singh, if you go to page 405.15. You'll see that he sends it to you on the same day, 1604.14. You see that? Do you see that, Mr. Molefe?
What did you want me to see?
Is asking whether you can see on page 405.15 that Mr. Anuj Singh signed this memorandum on the same day, namely 1604.14,
Yes.
same day as the letter that
Yeah.
McKinsey sent to the engagements.
All right. And if you have a look at the recommendation,
Yes.
sub 1, note the deliverables executed by the transaction advisor on the locomotive transaction compared to the original scope.
Yes.
Ratify the amendment in the allocation of scope of work from McKinsey to Regiment's Capital.
Yes.
3, ratify the amendment in the makeup of the transaction advisor consortium from Nedbank Capital with Regiment's Capital.
Yes.
Now, approve a change in the remuneration model of the transaction advisor compared to the original remuneration model, right?
Yes.
Delegate power to the GCFO to give effect to the above proposals, right?
Yes. Yes.
And now the fees,
To the above approvals.
I beg your pardon, approvals, thank you. And the fees you see in the table above, they were originally, we've seen, about 50 million. What were they now? What were the anticipated fees?
Chairperson and Mr. Mybeck. You know, what you're doing is really unfair. This was given to me yesterday, last night.
That's fine.
Yeah, we got it last night, right? Now, you can't take a document that we received last night and just go to the end of the document and say, can you see what's the recommended fees? What does the body of the document say?
Okay.
Now, as
Hang on, Mr.
you were talking,
Hang on, Mr. Molefe, hang on, so that we don't waste time. As I understand it, the arrangement that has been reached between Mr. Mybeck and yourself and your counsel is that in regard to the documents that you received last night, Mr. Mybeck would ask questions, but you have a right to say, I'm not able to answer questions on this document because I need more time, and that will be respected. So that's the arrangement. All you need to say is, look, I need to have more time on this document, and then that will be agreed. Nobody has forced you to answer questions on documents where you need more time that you received last night.
But even if I'm not forced, why put me in that position in the first place? Because if you look at page 40512, because I just skimmed through this document, it talks about value created by the advisor. It says 40513, impact on Transnet, change in remuneration model for the transaction advisor, and that is written in English. And it goes to general amendment principles, budget implications. But Mr. Mybeck's question is going right to the end and says, can you see that 50 million?
Yes, but
is
the
not
point
right,
is,
Chair.
you are free to say, look, I need to have time to do this, and that will be accepted.
I do, Chairperson.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so you want to leave this?
I would like to leave it. It was given last night, and it's not just a matter of going to the conclusion and saying, Mr. Molefe, can you see your capability there?
Yeah. That's,
No, that's what you said. You see, this is where you are involved, Mr.
Mr.
Molefe.
Molefe,
See that 50 million?
I think the chairperson
But
has made his position.
we are going to waste time now. Mr. Molefe, you have said you need more time. That's accepted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps what I should also then do is point out to you what other documents are contained here. You'll see that there's a whole lot of CIPRO reports towards the end. Not much reliance will be made on them other than pointing to a name or two. So could you go through all of them overnight, and then we'll come back to this memo, and we're going to come back to the first.
Which ones?
These documents, the 405 collection.
You might
document.
wish to make a note, Mr. You might wish to make a note of the documents
So the-
he would like you to look at overnight.
The documents that you were given last night are all the 405 documents, from 4051 to 40595. You'll remember that I've asked you questions about the memo at 4051. We're going to come back to that. And
To
I've asked you
405?
405.1
Yeah, to 405.6.
to 405.6. And then
And-
this is the second document that we'll come back to tomorrow, 405.7, and it's a long document that goes on.
Chair, when will we return to these documents? When will we return to these documents?
Oh, it is tomorrow.
No, Chair, I will go through them
Yeah.
and I will take legal advice.
Sure.
Okay, that's fine.
So I'm afraid it will not happen overnight.
I beg your pardon?
I'm afraid it will not happen overnight.
Well,
Well, the studying of the documents will happen overnight, but you say before you.
Yeah, before I come
You'll
and
get a
then
chance
I-
to.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right.
all right. Let us
Chair-
then...
Chair,
Well,
Madam-
isn't the position that, just one sec, isn't the position that it's better that you look at all the documents that you got last night, in respect of which you haven't had time to reflect, just so that we don't have a situation where later on you might say, well, I looked at only the documents that were mentioned, but I didn't look at the others, but I also got them last
Yes,
night. Yeah,
all the documents that were,
received last night.
yeah.
No,
See,
that's
the thing about the documents that we received last night, is
I'm
that
coming
some
to
of
you
them we had.
just now, yeah.
Some of them we had. So
Okay.
skimming through them,
Yes, takes
it was
time.
difficult to say, because now you see this one we have,
Yes.
this one, I'm not sure if they were
Okay.
giving, yeah, and so on and
No,
so
that's
forth.
fair
And,
enough.
and it's not possible to,
Yeah, there was
I mean,
not enough time to compare and check.
they arrived at about 7:30 on Sunday
Yeah.
night.
No, that's fair enough.
So
Yes.
Can I just also indicate that from page 405.28 all the way to 405.95, so it's the bulk of the documents, these are two CIPRO reports, Chairperson, where we will indicate to Mr. Molefe when we adjourn what we are using them for. It's really just a matter of showing that X person was a director and Y person was a director. There's a lot of paper here, but it involves actually only two names.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, Chair. I've just been instructed by my instructing attorney that we will have to consult with Mr. Molefe and thereafter only make a determination whether he will be ready tomorrow to testify on these documents, because as he has just indicated,
Yes.
I
No, that-
received them last night at 10 o'clock.
No, that's fine.
So we will liaise with the evidence leader to indicate whether we will be ready tomorrow or not. to testify.
Yes, but I think subject to what the position will be when we adjourn, the idea would be that Mr. Molefe comes back tomorrow, and if there is going to be a request for the adjournment of the hearing of his evidence, or the adjournment of the hearing of his evidence in regard to certain issues, then we can deal with it at that stage. Okay, all right. It's 1 minute past 6. I think every 2 hours we should just have a short adjournment. Let's have an adjournment, unless your estimate is that we're still going to take some time.
Well,
I just don't know how the documents that you can't ask Mr.
You
Molefe
see,
on, how
yes.
they affect the time that you needed for today.
the thing, Chairperson, it would obviously be preferable to deal with those documents and get them out of the way, because as you've
Yes.
seen, what I'm trying to do,
Yeah,
and I hope that it's helpful to you and to the witness, is to build a chronology
Yes.
and see how this particular contract unfolded.
yes.
So I'm happy to go back to the documents, but it's not first prize. The other thing that strikes
Yes.
me is if we work too late, then no doubt Mr. Molefe is going to say he didn't have the opportunity to look at the documents.
I think you are right. So maybe we should adjourn now.
Yes.
Maybe we should adjourn now so Mr. Molefe gets enough time to look at the documents and talk to his legal team.
As you
And
please.
then also because you say it's important for you, to, if possible, to deal with the documents before you move on because of the chronology that you want to build. So let's adjourn now and then resume at 10 tomorrow. I have that other application at 9:30. I don't know if you got an opportunity
I
to...
did have a look at it briefly,
Yes.
Chairperson. We don't intend
Intend to
to
file
say
anything
anything in
else.
response.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, we are going to adjourn now. In regard to Mr. Molefe's evidence, we'll resume at 10 tomorrow. In regard to the other application of Mr. Gama, that will be at 9:30 tomorrow morning. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.